Good morning. The U.S. Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation will come to order. This morning we are having a hearing on the nomination of Phil Washington to be administrator at the Federal Aviation Administration. Mr. Washington, welcome. Congratulations on your nomination. And I know that I think at least one or two of your colleagues, our colleagues, want to be here as well to do an introduction of you. So you're very fortunate to have them, and we will call on them in a minute. But as we are expecting the arrival of our ranking member, I'm going to go ahead and start with my opening statement in hopes that we can keep going this morning. Today, the Commerce Committee is meeting to consider the nomination of Phil Washington to be administrator of the FAA. The safety mission of the FAA starts at the top with the administrator, and I hope to hear from you, Mr. Washington, about your vision for making sure that the FAA is the gold standard in aviation safety. 3 years ago, Congress spoke clearly on needed reforms in the aircraft certification process and the FAA safety oversight. I worked with my colleague, Senator Wicker, who was the chair of the committee at that time, on that important legislation. Today, we need a clear commitment that this legislation is fully implemented and that these reforms, ensuring design oversight, mandating safety management systems, and holding manufacturers accountable are all adhered to. I want to especially thank the families of the 737 MAX tragedies for their important role in helping us craft and pass this landmark legislation. It is an important reminder that the FAA's leadership mandate extends internationally as well. The United States must be a strong safety voice at ICAO. We must raise the global safety bar on issues like pilot training and human factors. And the FAA administrator must also lead a large, complex organization. The safety agency has over 45,000 employees across different lines of business. Day in and day out, these workers answer the call and are engaged in the continuous job of safety oversight. We also need strong leadership at the FAA to continue the FAA reauthorization bill this year. The administration must deal with a myriad of new challenges presented by 21st century technology, advanced air mobility platforms, and manufacturing. And we also must build up our national airspace system with the world, which is already the world's busiest, most complex, with next generation technology and operational redundancies. In addition, the aviation future must be sustainable. That means developing the capacity and infrastructure for sustainable aviation fuel and meeting our 2050 targets for net zero carbon emissions. So, Mr. Washington, you're here today to explain how you and your leadership can meet that vision and those vital requirements of the FAA. I am pleased that our colleagues, Senator Bennett and Senator Hickenlooper, member of this committee, will be here to also say a few words on your behalf. But let me just say, you represent a great career that we much appreciate. Mr. Washington is a 24-year veteran of the U.S. Army, where he rose to the rank of Command Sergeant Major, the highest non-commissioned officer rank an enlisted soldier can achieve. And he would be the first African-American confirmed to serve as the FAA administrator. This would be a landmark achievement. And there has never been an FAA administrator nominee that has come from the enlisted ranks. The U.S. Army taught Mr. Washington how to get things done and get them done right. And indeed, the Department of Defense awarded him the prestigious Defense Superior Service Medal for exceptional service to the country. And after military retirement in 2000, Mr. Washington joined the Denver Regional District RTD and earned his way to the top of that transit agency with an annual ridership of over 40 million people. In Denver, Mr. Washington implemented the nation's first and only $2.2 billion transit-public-private partnership called Eagle P3 project on time and expanding multimodal transit regions, and in 2015 was named CEO of Los Angeles County Metropolitan Authority. In Los Angeles, he oversaw a rail and bus network that transports 1.2 million passengers and managed a budget of $9 billion and oversaw 10,000 employees. He was also key in leading an expansion of LA Metro, managing approximately $20 billion in infrastructure and new rail connections between the Los Angeles International Airport. Then in 2021, he became CEO of Denver International Airport, the third busiest airport in the world. Now for my Colorado colleagues, I'm not doubting, but I did have to look that up, and sure enough, yes, it's true. You move a lot of people through that airport. So he leads 35,000 employees and manages $1.3 billion operating budget, and under his watch, he set all-time passenger traffic records. Nearly 70 million passengers traveled through its terminals, up about 18% over 2021 and surpassing pre-COVID numbers. So organizations like the American Public Transport Association, Airports Council, National Business Aviation Administration, and many other organizations, including many of labor organizations, also support your nomination. So again, congratulations. Thank you for being here and look forward to having a chance to discuss with you the future of the FAA. I'll turn to my colleague, the ranking member, Senator Cruz, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The FAA faces enormous challenges. It must modernize our airspace while safely integrating new entrants like drones. It is trying to keep its reputation as the gold standard for aviation safety while dealing with far too many close calls and operating an outdated air traffic control system that must safely move roughly 2 million passengers a day. To meet its mission, the FAA needs a Senate-confirmed leader with decades of experience in aviation to make certain that the flying public is safe, the agency's primary obligation. This obligation is so important that Congress mandated that the FAA administrator must, quote, have experience in a field directly related to aviation. The nominee before us, Phil Washington, had a long and honorable career in the military, but he does not have any experience in aviation safety. This, quite simply, is a position he is not qualified for. I'm disappointed that the administration has chosen to treat a critical safety position, a position keeping our families safe, they've chosen to treat it as a patronage job. As a result of the White House playing politics with the flying public safety, the FAA has lacked a Senate-confirmed leader for a year now. I expect we'll hear some members of this committee gloss over Mr. Washington's lack of aviation and aviation safety experience by saying he has a record of strong management of transit agencies. He understands buses, and isn't that good enough for planes? But his record demonstrates the opposite. The Democrat city transit agencies he's run have been beset by mismanagement and wasteful spending. In 2019, CBS News reported Mr. Washington tried to add a $200,000 sauna to the LA Metro's employee gym after being presented with a more taxpayer-friendly $50,000 version. He proposed this lavish spending as city buses, quote, broke down and caught fire due to lack of money. The New York Times reported that a Denver rail project overseen by Mr. Washington ran up a $2 billion plus deficit and had become over 30 years behind schedule. Just last month, Mr. Washington and other Denver officials spent more than $100,000 on a junket to Africa to drum up support to Denver's airport. Government waste and delayed over-budget projects are things we want to change at the FAA, not continue. I'm also afraid that Mr. Washington's record suggests that he'd focus on virtue signaling at a time when the FAA needs to be laser-focused on aviation safety and modernization. As LA Metro CEO, he said, quote, everything we do in terms of mobility, we look through the lens of equity. At the Denver airport, he's spending millions of dollars to build a special, quote, hall of equity and change the contract bidding process to place a heavier emphasis on so-called equity and so-called social cultural merits. Safety, not political posturing, needs to be paramount at the FAA. I also have serious concerns regarding outstanding allegations of misconduct going back to Mr. Washington's time at LA Metro. He was named in multiple search warrants in an ongoing criminal public corruption investigation and was the subject of multiple whistleblower complaints. One whistleblower who exposed details of a politically connected contracting scheme claims to have been retaliated against by Mr. Washington. After Mr. Washington went to Denver, LA Metro settled the claims for more than $500,000. And just last month, Mr. Washington was named in a discrimination and retaliation lawsuit filed by a former Denver airport employee. Mr. Washington failed to notify this committee of the lawsuit, one of dozens of omissions in his questionnaire, suggesting that he has been less than fully transparent and raising concerns about how he'll collaborate with us as we work to reauthorize the FAA. Finally, Mr. Washington, as a retired member of the military, needs a waiver from both the House and the Senate to be eligible to serve, since federal law explicitly requires that the FAA administrator be a civilian, and retired members of the military do not, under the statute, qualify as civilians. On 5 occasions, Congress has passed legislative waivers so that retired military personnel could serve at the FAA. We would do the same for Mr. Washington if his record merited it, if he had experience in aviation safety. But it doesn't, and if Senate Democrats force this nomination through without a waiver, a legal cloud will hang over every single FAA action. Let me close with a quote. Quote, I have said that it is very important that in this day and age, when it comes to aviation, safety must always be our top priority. We've considered the nomination, the nominee's record, an ongoing case of whistleblower retaliation, and given all of that, it is clear to me that he is not the right person for the safety culture that we need today at the FAA. Those were the words spoken about a former FAA nominee by the chairwoman of this committee in 2019 about Steve Dixon, who had 40 years of aviation experience. Mr. Washington is not the right nominee for this position.
Thank you, Senator Cruz. In my opening statement, I forgot to mention a letter by our former House colleague, Chairman Peter DeFazio, who you worked with extensively. I want to enter that into the record. And he called you a strong leader with 2 decades of senior leadership that we need to help accomplish the goals at the FAA. So with that, I'm going to turn to our colleagues. I think our colleague on the committee, Senator Hickenlooper first, and then Senator Bennett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We need an FAA administrator who is Senate confirmed, but also who knows how to get things done. An administrator who can manage the complex bureaucracy at FAA and prepare for the realities of modern air travel today. Someone who can give us confidence the next time we get on a flight. Someone who will reassure us that we'll get where we're going safely and not have to think about how everything works again. That's Phil Washington. Phil came from humble beginnings and, as the Madam Chair mentioned, served 24 years in the Army, achieved the rank of Command Sergeant Major, the highest rank for enlisted servicemen. And, you know, Command Sergeant Majors are the people that get things done by organizing, motivating their troops, delivering on the mission, and holding people accountable. He was stationed in Fort Carson, Colorado, the beginning of his relationship with Colorado. You know, our veterans are renowned for their discipline, their leadership, their courage, their dedication to service. Phil embodies all these traits and more. When he led the Metro Denver's Regional Transportation District, which is by far the largest transit agency in the state, he put our city's transit system back on track. He came in when the flagship fast track program was over budget, was behind schedule, beset by problems and complications. When he left, 3/4 was completed or under construction. He next took the helm of the Los Angeles County Metropolitan Transportation Authority, the 3rd largest transit system in the country, serving over 220 million passengers annually. Again, another multi-billion-dollar expansion, which was beset by challenges, and he got that sorted out. He's now the CEO of Denver International Airport for the last couple of years, the 3rd busiest airport in the world, as the Madam Chair pointed out. He has transformed the airport's once aging infrastructure The Great Hall project is going to expand DIA's terminal capacity from 70 million passengers a year to 100 million passengers a year. That's his program, Vision 100, will support that transition by the end of this decade. Phil recognizes growth is more than just expanding terminals, modernizing runways. He's launched DIA's Center of Equity and Excellence in Aviation. It's really the first of its kind training facility to make sure we can grow a diverse workforce and a small business pipeline in aviation that does deliver on the combined mission of transportation at the safest possible levels. He's not hesitated to act decisively again and again when a crisis strikes. We had the winter storms of 2022 that devastated air travel all across the country, damaged our economy. He immediately launched a rigorous after-action review between DIA and its major airline partners. This after-action review will identify the causes to the airline disruption catastrophe and prevent future incidents from happening again. That's the kind of decisive action that we need to see in the FAA. Phil fits the mold of several past administrators. There have been questions raised as to previous administrators. Jane Garvey, who was the administrator under President Clinton, came from the Massachusetts Department of Public Works and led Boston's Logan Airport. Marion Blakey, who served in the Bush administration, was administrator of the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration before coming to the FAA. Michael Huerta oversaw the ports of New York City and San Francisco and had a couple senior roles within the Department of Transportation before coming to lead the FAA. But I think Phil breaks the mold of past FAA administrators in important ways. He's not an airline industry insider using this role as a position for the industry to be policing itself. The challenges facing FAA are those of managing a large, complex bureaucracy badly in need of modernization. And certainly in that respect, he's no novice. He's the CEO of the third busiest airport in the world, as we've said, and manages a workforce roughly of 35,000 employees compared to 45,000 at FAA, so roughly the same size. And he took the role amidst a big expansion project that was running into budget challenges, scheduling challenges before he came along, and he got it back on track. And this is not to mention his experience in the Army, where he honed his discipline and leadership skills and was recognized for it. He's built a reputation of coming into organizations filled with challenges and successfully transforming them into successes. He takes on the big, complex problems and gets results. It's the kind of person we want in our federal management system. He is for those reasons, I urge this committee to be thoughtful and objectively look at Phil's record and what it shows. He's the right man and nominated at the right time to lead this critical agency. I look forward to seeing where he can lead the FAA with his bold vision for the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Bennett.
Thank you, Chair.
Welcome.
Oh, thank you, Chair Cantwell, for having me, and Ranking Member Cruz for the opportunity to introduce Phil Washington. It's a privilege to be here with my colleague, John Hickenlooper. Phil's obviously President Biden's nominee to lead the Federal Aviation Administration. John Hickenlooper and I have known Phil for almost 20 years, going back to the days when John was mayor of Denver, and he graciously endured me as his chief of staff. We both worked closely together with Phil, who had recently joined Colorado's Regional Transportation District after an exceptional career that took him from his youth in a housing project on the south side of Chicago to the rank of command sergeant after 24 years in the U.S. Army. I believe Phil's son, Phil Washington Jr., is with us this morning. I thank him for making the trip to Washington. Thanks for sharing your dad with us so he can continue to serve Colorado and the country. Senator Hickenlooper has already offered an excellent overview of Phil's experience in Colorado's Regional Transportation District, LA County's Transportation Authority, and Denver's International Airport. So instead of taking you through that again, I want to share my observations about Phil's specific qualifications to lead the FAA at this critical juncture for the agency. As this committee appreciates more than most, the FAA has long set the global standard for airline safety. But recent incidents have shaken the public's confidence and undermined our global leadership. This is the perfect time for a leader like Phil Washington, who would bring a proven record for delivering results. He turned around RTD. He turned around transit in LA County. He's driving overdue change at DIA, and I have no doubt he would do the same at the FAA. I understand some members of this committee have argued Phil lacks direct experience in aviation. We just heard that argument. I'm surprised by that because, as we've heard, he currently is running the third busiest airport on planet Earth. He literally spends every day liaising with 25 airlines, managing over 30,000 employees, and navigating local, state, and federal aviation policy. He's spearheading the most ambitious overhaul of that third busiest airport at DIA since Colorado first built the airport almost 30 years ago. I point out to the chairwoman that we're very proud that DIA is the youngest airport in America, but it's 30 years old. We need to build airports in this country again. Phil could help us with that too. He's leading an $800 million renovation to the main hall, building 39 new gates, designing a 7th runway, and revamping the airport's entire baggage system, all with the traveling public continuing to make its way through the airport. Phil was also instrumental in developing Vision 100, a strategic plan for DIA to prepare the airport to process 100 million passengers a year through an expanded workforce, infrastructure, and air service network. So despite suggestions to the contrary, Phil's experience is comparable to previous FAA nominees like Jane Garvey and Michael Huerta, whom John mentioned, both of whom the Senate confirmed with a strong bipartisan support. Instead of focusing on Phil's obvious qualifications, there's been an attempt in recent months to distract from his record and, frankly, impugn his character. And I won't dignify that effort in my remarks. I will just say that the past 20 years have left me only with the highest regard for Phil's integrity and leadership. That's what the people of Denver believe about Phil, and the people of Colorado do as well. And you don't have to take my word for it. The mayor of Denver, Michael Hancock, is at the hearing. Before the mayor asked Phil to lead DIA, he conducted a thorough background check. Phil not only cleared that review, the Denver City Council confirmed him unanimously. They don't agree on anything, by the way, but they agreed on Phil. Senator Hickenlooper and I can tell you from experience that you don't get a lot of unanimous votes, as I said, from the City Council, and I see no reason why Phil's historic nomination shouldn't receive a unanimous vote from this committee. Any fair assessment of his career and of his character would see a nominee with integrity, drive, and a record of results at every institution he's led. He would make an outstanding administrator for the FAA, and I wholeheartedly endorse his nomination. Thank you, Madam Chair, for giving me a few minutes.
Thank you, Senator Bennett. Thank you to both you and Senator Hickenlooper for being part of today's hearing and endorsing, obviously, with your work experience with the Denver Airport and Mr. Washington's leadership. Mr. Washington, we now turn to you. Feel free to introduce any family or guests with you and make your opening statement.
Chair Cantwell, Ranking Member Cruz, and members of the committee, it's an honor to appear before you today as the President's nominee for Administrator of the Federal Aviation Administration. I want to thank President Biden, Secretary Buttigieg for selecting me to fill this important role. If confirmed, I look forward to working with each of you to strengthen our world-class aviation system and make it better than it's ever been. I appreciate the generous introductions from Senators Bennett and Hickenlooper. I'm honored today to have my mayor here, Denver Mayor Michael Hancock. I want to thank my family, of whom my only son, Philip Jr., is here. I also want to thank Billy Nolan, our current acting administrator. As a man who grew up from humble beginnings in public housing on the south side of Chicago, I am honored and humbled by this nomination. If confirmed, I pledge that I will work diligently to support the extraordinary team at the FAA. I grew up poor as an only son of a family of 6 children. My mother was a single parent. She worked 12 hours a day to put food on the table for all of us. She took me to listen and learn from the great faith and civic leaders who lived in and visited the city of Chicago in the 60s and 70s. This is where I realized my purpose and desire to serve people and be a public servant. I began my public service and leadership journey nearly 45 years ago when I enlisted in the U.S. Army to serve my country. I ultimately served for nearly 25 years, earning the highest military enlisted rank, that of Command Sergeant Major E9. During my military career, I served, led, and motivated men and women from every corner of this great land. I honorably retired from the U.S. Army some 22 years ago. As a military veteran and leader of 3 large transportation organizations, my broad transportation, safety knowledge, and real-world leadership experiences provide me a unique perspective of how aviation and all modes of transportation should integrate into a seamless system. While serving as CEO at Denver's Regional Transportation District, I led the effort to connect rail to the Denver International Airport. As the CEO of LA Metro, I led the planning and implementation and completion of key construction milestones for a $2 billion automated people mover. That electric train system connects LA Metro Rail and other facilities with airport terminals. It will operate 24/7 to serve approximately 30 million passengers annually, resulting in 117,000 fewer vehicles traveled per day. I also led the completion of a $15 million MetroLink rail station that connects more neighborhoods with Hollywood Burbank Airport, reducing traffic congestion on Interstate 5 and residential roads. Overseeing these massive projects provide me with a great deal of experience managing large, complex, and challenging projects and organizations. My experience as CEO of the 3rd busiest airport in the world, Denver International Airport with 35,000 workers, translates well to the FAA. During the aviation challenges of the last several months, travelers through my airport have not asked me how much direct aviation experience I had. Instead, they asked me where was their luggage, and why their flight was delayed or canceled, and how their families would survive in my airport during rigid nights. We engaged with our partners. We worked as a team. We took care of travelers at my airport. The FAA is at a crossroads, an agency that must protect the safest era of aviation, modernize its technology, lift employee morale, while staffing up and maintaining its global leadership in aviation. Yes, we need to reinforce that we are the regulator for aircraft manufacturers, airlines, and new entrants to the national airspace. Yes, we need to stress continuously safety as second nature for all FAA employees. However, to accomplish all of these things, we need permanent leadership at the top of the FAA to address the challenges that we have seen in the last several years. If confirmed, I will draw on a career spanning almost 45 years to be that leader. The safety of the traveling public will remain my top priority, as it has been for me leading the 3rd largest airport in the world, 2 large transit agencies, and men and women in uniform. If confirmed, I will be guided by the sacrifice and historic advocacy of the families of the 737 MAX and Colgan Air tragedies and perform the administrator role as I have performed every leadership role in my professional life, with accountability, integrity, transparency, respect, honesty, discipline, and an innovative mindset. I will own well-intentioned failure, and FAA employees will own their success. I will quicken the pace of public service and leave the FAA better than I found it. My hope is that the committee and the full Senate will see the value of my leadership and multimodal transportation experience as it deliberates my confirmation. Thank you for your consideration. I'm excited about the opportunity to serve, and I'm pleased to take your questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Washington. I'm convinced that as somebody who runs the third largest airport, that the issues of the FAA that deal with air traffic controllers, deal with next-gen systems, deal with the integration of new entrants, that you have a very good grasp of those issues. You have to if you're running a large organization like the airport every day. And my sense is your history of being a manager of large organizations with with thousands of employees also gives you a very good sense of some of the challenges of moving a big bureaucracy to address the technology issues of today. That is clearly any organization's challenge today, is how do you adapt to innovation and new technology. But I do want to get you on the record as it relates to the aviation safety bill that I mentioned that Senator Wicker and I passed out of committee after response to the MAX accidents, and the fact that we feel that industry and FAA got too cozy, that they moved away from the delegated engineering representative model in which the FAA was really in charge, and somehow confused the people on the ground as to the level of oversight that was required. Our reforms made sure that those employees who are doing this certification work were directly hired, that they were able to communicate directly with the FAA, and that they were able to be removed from the FAA. So I want to know first and foremost, do you support that focus, and will you continue to fight to implement the oversight of an aggressive FAA and holding manufacturers accountable for their work in engineering?
Senator, thank you for the question. Absolutely, yes. I think Administrator Dixon and Acting Administrator Nolan have done a great job of sort of foot stomping that we are the regulator. I will continue that. I will also continue the implementation of the Reform Act and look to accelerate the outstanding things that have not been completed. So absolutely, yes.
One of the things that isn't completed, and I think we may end up having Mr. Nolan back here to talk about this, is just because we want to continue to make progress and he is the safety lead, is that the legislation also called for integrated project leadership between NASA, the Air Force, and the FAA, and making sure that novel certification, technology that's just emerging, it's not lost on anybody, particularly the NTSB and some of the international organizations, that the implementation of new technology and human factors is something that we should be paying more attention to. So what will you do to make sure that this particular mission, this what some of us call graybeards, that the FAA is populated with the right technical aviation expertise, that counter-referencing between NASA and Air Force and others are implemented so that we really do have the best and brightest technology leads as we are going through the certification process?
Well, again, thank you for the question, Senator. I know the FAA has been doing a number of things around recruiting and around making sure that compensation is adequate to bring folks in. I will continue that. I will, my track record of standing up various training facilities and various training programs will allow me to attract great talent into the FAA. I think it's also important for us to go to every corner of this country looking for talent. At the Denver International Airport, the Center of Equity and Excellence in Aviation, we're doing just that. And my plan would be to scale that up, to look for the best talent in this country to bring into FAA.
And what are your ideas for how to get that done, given that we do have real FAA critical expertise? What are your ideas on how to change this?
Well, a couple of things. We were talking about my military career. There's something called the Transition Assistance Program in terms of the military. I'm well familiar with those. These are programs that help soldiers get out of the military. I think that is an incredible source and a resource for great talent. I am tied into those transition assistance programs or TAP programs. I would start there. I would start in our colleges. I would start in our HBCUs. I would start in places around the country to show people a career pathway. It's one thing to tell a young person, get into the aviation industry. It's quite another thing to show them what that means and show them sort of the cradle to executive leadership pathway. And that is what we have designed in my years in transportation.
Well, this is going to be one of the very biggest challenges at the FAA, is getting the right talent and getting them there very quickly. Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Washington, you've emphasized your time as CEO of the Denver Airport, 20 months. Have you ever flown a plane?
Thank you for the question, Senator. No, I have never flown a plane.
So you weren't a military pilot or a commercial airline pilot?
No, Senator.
Have you ever worked for an airline?
No, Senator.
Have you ever worked as an air traffic controller?
No, Senator.
You ever worked for a company that manufactures airplanes?
No, Senator.
You ever worked for a company that fixes airplanes?
No, Senator.
So for 20 months, you've been in charge of the Denver airport. You're in charge of the airport's buildings, correct?
I am in charge of everything that goes on at that airport.
Okay. Well, I'm not sure that's exactly right. You're in charge of parking at the airport. Is that correct? How many parking spaces are there at the Denver airport?
Thousands.
Okay. You're in charge of all the shops and restaurants in the airport. How many restaurants are there in the Denver airport?
We have anywhere from 150 to 200 or so.
You're in charge of coffee shops and clothing stores and newsstands. You're not in charge of the pilots, are you?
No, Senator.
You're not in charge of the airplane mechanics, are you?
No, Senator.
You're not in charge of the air traffic controllers, are you?
No, Senator.
You know, I look at prior FAA administrators. You and I talked a couple of days ago. I respect your military service. I look at prior FAA administrators. Current acting FAA Administrator Billy Nolan was a commercial airline pilot. He worked at multiple airlines in management roles. He has certificates in aviation safety from 3 different institutions, from the U.S. Army Safety Center and the U.S. Naval Postgraduate School. That's under President Biden. Administrator Steve Dixon, under both Biden and Trump, was an Air Force fighter pilot, a commercial airline pilot, an executive at Delta Airlines, 40 years of aviation experience. Acting Administrator Daniel Elwell was an Air Force combat pilot, a commercial airline pilot, a senior FAA official, and an aviation industry executive. Administrator Randy Babbitt was a commercial airline pilot for 25 years and served as the president of a labor union for pilots. Those are all people who know something about aviation and safety. As I look at your record, I see a record where you've got experience with buses, you've got experience with trains. Buses and trains are very different from planes. My understanding is this administration previously considered you for the board of Amtrak. That could well have been a position you were qualified for, and you might well have received bipartisan support to serve in that role. You know, a lot of discussion, quite rightly, has focused on the horrific crashes of the 737 MAX that took 346 souls from us. Let me ask you, Mr. Washington, what is an angle of attack sensor?
The angle of attack sensor is a sensor that is on the front of the plane that controls the tilt and the altitude of the plane.
And how many of them are there on a 737 MAX?
I believe 2.
And what systems are there if there are contradictory signals from the angle of attack sensor?
What systems are there?
Yeah.
I would say the MCAS system, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay. The MCAS system is responsible for the crashes at issue. What happens when you get a different reading from 2 different sensors?
Can you repeat that question, Senator?
What happens when you get a different reading from 2 different angle of attack sensors?
Well, I think human reaction needs to take over if that occurs.
So why did that not happen on the Lion Air and Ethiopian Air flights?
Well, Senator, I'm not a pilot. I don't know if I can answer that particular question. But
Mr. Washington, I believe you. But at the end of the day, that's the fundamental problem. For this administration to nominate someone as FAA administrator who can't answer the question, why were 346 people killed in horrific crashes that result in the 737 MAX being grounded for a long time, is striking. By the way, Administrator Dixon, after the FAA recertified the 737 MAX, he went and flew it personally. Listen, let me be clear, and you and I talked about this. FAA administrator is a specialized position. I'm not qualified to be FAA administrator. I have no idea how to fly a plane. No one in their right mind would put me in charge of aviation safety because I don't have that experience. I suspect most of the members of this committee are in a similar position. The American people, when they think about aviation safety, when they think about, I played in this committee, a Southwest Airlines and FedEx plane almost colliding at Austin's airport. They want an FAA administrator who knows why those planes crash and knows how to fix it to keep them safe. And with all respect, Mr. Washington, it gives no comfort to the flying public that their pilot might be a transgendered witch, but doesn't actually know how to prevent the plane from crashing into the ground and killing them. I believe your record is woefully lacking. And in fact, you have zero aviation safety experience. And I don't believe you'll have the votes for confirmation, as you and I visited about earlier this week.
Senator Hickenlooper.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Washington, I want to switch the conversation. And just for the record, in my 20 years of knowing Phil Washington and working with him, he has a greater focus on safety in every one of his roles than anyone I've seen in comparable roles. And it's something that is instinctual within him, and he creates a culture around safety. I want to talk a little bit about rural air service now. Rural communities depend on regional air service to grow their economies and stay connected to the national air network. In most of the country, we have a network of these rural airports. The DOT and the FAA each have a role to ensure that airline operators maintain air service in rural areas across the country. In Colorado, this would be to communities like Pueblo and Alamosa, Grand Junction, Cortez. I could go down a long list. Mr. Washington, can you discuss the importance of rural communities maintaining access to reliable air service, and if confirmed, will you commit to maintaining and expanding service to rural communities?
yeah, thank you for the question, Senator. I definitely commit to working with rural airports. They serve a vitally important mode of mobility, if you will, for folks that live in those rural areas. And so we at Denver International Airport actually deal with and provide assistance where we can with rural airports in the state of Colorado. So I would continue that as the administrator as well. There's special things and special arrangements around construction and getting grant funding out to those rural, especially cold area airports, so they can build during the seasons where it's good for them to build. So to answer your question, absolutely, I would provide assistance there.
I appreciate that. I'd also like to present the challenge that the problems facing FAA are those of managing a large, complex organization, the type of organization you've made a career out of running successfully, both as a command sergeant major and at RTD, at LA Metro and DIA. I think if we were to ask pretty much anyone who traveled in the last year if they want another person from the airline industry in charge of FAA, they would probably say they didn't. I don't think the airlines should be regulating themselves. The NOTAM system failure, the Southwest meltdown, extended delays and cancellations, near misses on runways are all management and policy issues. Being a good pilot's not going to help you or anyone be the FAA administrator that this country needs that can solve these issues. Being able to manage a large, complex organization is. Why don't you talk just for a moment about the complexity of DIA and how you synthesize 35,000 employees and make sure the right people are in charge and then hold them accountable?
Thank you for the question, Senator. First of all, safety is the #1 priority. We know I know that is my top priority. I lean on a long record of leadership and management and oversight of billion-dollar projects and people. And so I think that one of the first things I think about is creating a vision for the organization. I think about creating a vision for the FAA. I think about breaking down stovepipes. I think about providing professional development for the employees. And I have to say, I had someone ask me, why do you provide all of this professional development for folks and then they might leave? And my response was, suppose I don't provide it and they stay. That becomes a real issue. So I think, the way I handle the 35,000 is to tell them what they can expect from me. When I walk into a job, that's one of the first things I do. And then I also tell them what I expect from them. And so providing that vision, being visible, telling folks what you expect and what you expect from them is the start of providing a very, very good culture within the organization, a culture of ownership, I call it.
Right, and I think I'll leave you, the committee with this observation that when Phil came on board at DIA, we were in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. Air travel was dramatically rebounding at the same time that the gate expansion was going full tilt. And I think 2 points. One is that he was able to maintain the operational efficiencies of the airport and that in those challenging times. But almost more importantly, he took a massive construction project that was behind schedule and over budget and sorted it out in record time. If you look at the investments that this country is going to make in air transportation, having someone who has repeated examples of coming in to difficult construction projects, having that person holding accountable the entire investment we're making in transportation is, I think, the right direction for
Senator
the FAA.
Wicker, thank you. Senator Wicker.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and Mr. Washington, Sergeant Major Washington, thank you for being here. I have a great deal of respect for your service with the United States military, and I say that as a veteran who didn't do anything nearly what you were able to do as a Command Sergeant Major. You were nominated in July of 2022, is that correct?
Yes, Senator.
And Sergeant Major, I think it's fair to say that you would already be in office, you would already be confirmed if there had not been serious bipartisan questions about your qualifications and your fitness for office. And it gives me no great pleasure to say that. This is, I've been chairman of this committee, I've been ranking member of this committee, and I've been on it for a long time. This is, what is going on with your nomination is not my idea of a good time, but it's a responsibility that I think we have. At the time of your nomination, you had had this CEO position at Denver for about a year. Safety is the top priority of the FAA, and I think really on the both ends of the dais, there have been serious questions about your expertise in that area, and that's been pointed out in some of the questions. On your resume at Denver, you cite specifically success in construction, a renovation program in facilities, and the implementation of a career pathway. Again, I don't think that qualifies you for for this position, and in particular with what has been going on the last few months with regard to these near misses. It's very, very troubling. There's something, though, that Senator Cruz said that I'm not sure I agree with. He said you might have been confirmed for the Amtrak board had you been nominated for that. And that may be true, but we would still have had to get better answers to these questions about investigations and about allegations that are still out there about public corruption. You have been involved in multiple corruption investigations, accused of retaliating against a whistleblower that exposed this corruption. The investigation relates to involvement with a series of no-bid contracts awarded by LA Metro to a nonprofit to operate a sexual harassment hotline. The investigation found that the hotline cost the taxpayers more than $8,000 per call. Most of these calls were missed dials or spam. The nonprofit awarded the contract, was a close friend and campaign donor of an LA County supervisor. The investigation is still pending and has been taken over just recently by the California Attorney General. And in addition, you have been accused of discriminating and retaliating against the whistleblower who received a $625,000 settlement. I'm not sure for any position with those being unresolved that you would have been confirmed. And again, it gives me no pleasure to say this. Just days ago, a lawsuit was filed by the Denver International Airport's former senior vice president of parking, Benjamin Juarez, who left his post last year. The lawsuit alleges discriminatory pay and personnel practices at the airport. Again, there was this matter that Senator Cruz mentioned about the search warrant, including accusations of misconduct and in seeking a record of your communications. And this has not yet been resolved. As we meet today, the California Attorney General's office is still conducting this public corruption investigation. We need a very, very qualified person in charge of the FAA immediately. And for the life of me, I do not understand why the president persists with this nomination based on so many questions from the corruption aspect and also the qualification aspect. And for that reason, I do think the bipartisan opposition will continue, sir. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Chair Cantwell. The FAA has been without a permanent administrator for nearly a year, and this is a hatchet job. Instead of moving quickly to confirm the president's nominee, Republicans and their allies have tried to delay Mr. Washington's confirmation by attacking him, throwing everything they have to try and stop a qualified nominee, and in doing so, they are smearing a longtime public servant and Army veteran. Mr. Washington has decades of experience overseeing large, complex transportation organizations. He runs the Denver International Airport, the world's third busiest airport. He ran LA Metro, one of the largest transportation systems in the world, and he honorably served his country for 24 years, serving in the U.S. Army Tank Command before earning the rank of Command Sergeant Major, the highest non-commissioned officer rank an enlisted soldier can achieve. But he's facing a smear campaign. The people opposing his nomination are trying to desperately turn every aspect of his career into a scandal. Anyone who's been in leadership gets sued. I think I was sued like 2 months ago, and they named every member of the congressional delegation, every member of the I think it was every member of the legislature. Someone actually threw the summons over my fence and said, you got served. I didn't know that was the thing they said. And I went back to my staff, many of whom are lawyers, and they said, what is this? And they said, well, they named the governor. This is similar. This is 17 individual defendants, the entire board of directors, and the U.S. Secretary of Labor. That's not a serious lawsuit and should be called out for what it is. It's nonsense. It's immaterial to these proceedings. And it's just a pretext for opposing the nominee's confirmation to this critical agency because, again, Mr. Washington is well qualified for the job. During his time as CEO of DIA, the airport has seen a nearly 20% increase in passengers, substantially contributed to by my arrivals from HNLDEN every Monday. And before becoming CEO there, he spent 6 years as CEO of LA Metro running the transportation system in our country's largest metro area. Before that, he spent 6 years as CEO of the Denver Regional Transportation District, overseeing a system that serves nearly 50 million riders annually. Mr. Washington is a skilled and dedicated public administrator with an extensive record showing that he knows transportation, and ignoring this to punish him over fake scandals is absurd. Mr. Washington is exactly the kind of person that we should want in public service. He has the experience needed to lead the FAA and is ready to step into this role. So my question for you, Mr. Washington, is can you tell me how your experience at DIA is going to enable you to be a good FAA administrator?
Well, thank you for the question, Senator. I think Denver International Airport is, of course, the third largest. Safety is number one at all of our airports, and it will be for me at FAA. In running Denver International Airport, someone asked me the other day, well, what do you do when you first get up in the morning as a CEO of Denver International Airport? And I talked about reading my sit rep, if you will. And a sit rep is what's going on right then at that airport, and it's always around safety. And so it's around also TSA wait times, it's around FAA arrival times. It's everything about that airport. We do those three times a day. And so I believe that what I'm doing now and what I have done for the last 40 years, to include my military career, is directly transferable in terms of especially leadership. Leadership is a real thing. It is a real skill, motivating people, inspiring people, getting people to do what they otherwise may not do is a real skill. And I think when we talk about the FAA, we're talking about a different kind of organization that needs a different skill set to run it now in this day and time. And I think I bring that to the table.
Thank you very much.
Senator Moran.
Chairwoman, thank you. Mr. Washington, thank you for your presence here today. I represent a state in which aviation is hugely important, one of the most significant components of how Kansans earn a living. We are known as the air capital of the world. We manufacture general aviation, commercial aircraft, defense. We have many companies that are involved in air safety and navigation aids. And certainly the FAA and its administrator is among the most important federal agencies and individuals that have a consequence to my constituents and to the country in this case. I'm often thought of as a senator who worries and cares about and works on behalf of aviation because of that manufacturing base, and that's certainly a component. But I represent a state in which air travel, Kansans who fly, and Kansans who fly from Kansas airports matter greatly to me. And so I recognize the value and importance of an airport, large and small. Yesterday, Kansas City celebrated the opening of its new airport. We're excited about that. Wichita has a new airport, Eisenhower. But I also represent, as was indicated earlier by those who are, I think it was the senator from Colorado, the importance of those small and regional airports. Essential air service, perhaps with the exception of Alaska, Kansas is the most dependent upon essential air service programs to make certain that our rural airports are able to remain available and open and that transportation occurs. And we forget sometimes the importance of aviation for bringing a physician or a patient to a physician, to crop dusting, to the way, again, we earn our living in Kansas in agriculture. That airplane matters greatly. So this is hugely important, and I have invited every FAA administrator since I've been in Congress to come to Kansas and spend time with me. And if you're confirmed, I will make that request. The challenges that the FAA faces, in my view, are tremendous, and the leadership needs to be consistent and bold. It needs to be different than it has been in the sense that we've had too many changes too many times, and we need consistency. I would be delighted to hear how you believe you can manage the magnitude of this job, and you've indicated that to some degree. Let me give you an example of, and tell me how you would handle this. The aviation industry, in recovering from the pandemic, experienced a tremendous backlog, supply chain problems, difficulty in getting answers from the FAA, but also difficulty in getting parts and materials from suppliers. Throughout the pandemic, the protection of the aviation supply chain has been important to me and to Senator Cantwell in legislation, as evidenced by legislation called the Aviation Manufacturing Jobs Protection Program. So tell me how you would handle the magnitude of the problems that occur when there's a crisis in this country, and tell me about your experience, again, that allows you to lead an agency that has such consequences in the decisions it makes.
Well, thank you for the question, Senator. I guess what I think about, you talk about stability. I think bringing stability to the FAA is part of addressing those issues. And so what I would do is put together a plan, a tactical plan around materials, a tactical plan around supply chain, parts, and have that as a first priority for me. Some of the issues that we have seen around the country now with material cost increases and inflation and all those things is tied into the availability of various materials. And so putting a plan together within FAA to address that is one of the first things that I would do. The other thing that I think about, you mentioned the subsidies, you mentioned the community.
Essential Air Service.
Essential Air Service and those sorts of things. I think we need to do better. The FAA needs to do better with those subsidies as well, and that would be one of my priorities as well. But to answer your question, putting together a solid plan to address rural airports, to address places like Kansas, would be something that would be one of my first priorities.
Mr. Washington, I don't think it's through any fault of your own. You and I have not met until we shook hands a moment ago. And if you are interested, I would make certain that if you invite yourself to my office to have a conversation, I would accept that invitation.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Senator Peters.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, Mr. Washington, you've been nominated for a very tough job, and I just want to thank you for your willingness to take on this responsibility. Certainly, you have the experience, the qualifications, and may I say the leadership qualities necessary to lead the FAA during a very challenging time. So, thank you for your willingness to take on this very difficult task. Mr. Washington, I've long advocated for the FAA to transition away from the use of toxic PFAS containing firefighting foams. And in fact, in the 2018 FAA reauthorization, I led the adoption of language that directed the FAA to no longer require the use of these foams at Part 139 airports. Last year, President Biden signed into law my legislation entitled Preventing PFAS Runoff at Airports Act, which allows airports to purchase the equipment they need to test their firefighting response without discharging toxic PFAS chemicals. Michigan airports continue to lead the way on this issue, but they need a strong partner in the FAA to fully transition away from the use of PFAS and protect our communities from further contamination. As an airport CEO, I know you have firsthand experience when it comes to PFAS at airports. And I would just like to know, if confirmed, how will that experience shape your approach to ending these substances in aviation?
Well, thank you for the question, Senator. I agree, this is an important issue. At Denver, we started our own cleanup, a voluntary cleanup. We've already started that. Now, I know not everyone can do that, but we wanted to start for the benefit of everyone at our airport, including our employees. My understanding is that the new performance requirements for the firefighting foam was issued earlier this year by DOD. We would work with DOD, and I think that if confirmed, I would have a special relationship with the Department of Defense as a veteran. But we would work to develop a transition plan around PFAS. There are a number of airports that are doing this very well. And so, you know, perhaps there is sort of a peer-to-peer exchange that can occur while we're waiting on that alternative as well. And so I would bring what we're doing at Denver and scale that up because I think we are addressing the PFAS problem probably better than most airports around the country.
Right, right. Last week, I asked Acting Administrator Nolan about improving FAA's effort to integrate unmanned aerial systems into our national airspace. Communities in my state of Michigan are looking to take advantage of this cutting-edge technology, and a lot of economic opportunity that will result from that. However, there are major barriers to adoption, including slow implementation of the provisions that my colleagues and I passed in the 2018 reauthorization bill. So my question for you, sir, is if confirmed, will you commit to prioritizing efforts to ensure that the U.S. maintains global leadership in advanced aviation, particularly unmanned aerial systems?
Thank you for the question, Senator. Absolutely. Absolutely, and that gets to what I think is the slow pace of rulemaking as well. One of my priorities is to streamline internally, to start with, internal to FAA, to streamline the rulemaking process. And so absolutely, I agree that we need to move on this. I agree that we need to understand and keep pace with industry on unmanned aerial systems. I will do that as administrator.
Great, well, thank you. I chair the Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee here in the Senate, and one of my priorities is to ensure that airports have the tools to counter those who may use UAS as a threat and as a domestic security risk. The FAA has been a partner in working to understand how these systems affect our airspace and transportation. But we're going to need to work together to protect our critical infrastructure from these threats. UAS have a lot of opportunities, but they also present serious threats to airspace and critical infrastructure as well, as you know. So my last question is, if confirmed, will you commit to work with me to ensure that there is robust interagency coordination to counter UAS efforts?
Thank you for the question, Senator. Absolutely. I think I know the Biden administration proposed legislation to expand authorities is out there. FAA has been a partner with that, and I will continue that path.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Peters. Senator Thune.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for holding this important hearing today. It's difficult to think of a time in recent history when the FAA has been confronted with more challenges. On top of implementing the last FAA reauthorization and the certification reform bill, the agency is contending with an increasingly complex national airspace system, which must accommodate the growth in commercial space activity and the integration of drones and advanced air mobility aircraft. Managing all these challenges while maintaining the highest level of safety in the world's busiest aviation system requires a skilled leader with extensive aviation experience. I'm concerned that the FAA's delay in addressing these challenges, further setting back the modernization of the air traffic control system and jeopardizing aviation safety. Recent travel disruptions, especially those related to recent ATC issues and the failure of the NOTAM system in January, underscore the need for action. So as this committee begins work on the next FAA reauthorization, it's going to be essential to ensure the agency has strong, capable leadership at the helm.
So I appreciate the opportunity to review Mr. Washington's qualifications and appreciate you being here to testify today. On February the 8th, Senator Warner and I introduced the Increasing Competitiveness for American Drones Act, which directs FAA to establish a regulatory framework for beyond visual line of sight UAS operations, especially since many UAS certification applications through the current process have languished for years. I believe that a clear framework for such operations is critical to the safety and efficiency of the NAS. And I intend to work with the chair and the ranking member to integrate this legislation into an FAA reauthorization bill. So my question is, if confirmed, can you describe how you would work to create a beyond visual line of sight regulatory framework and otherwise streamline the airworthiness approval process for UAS?
Thank you for the question, Senator. That would definitely be a priority of mine. I know the FAA is doing work around this right now, and I will check on the progress of that. But I think this is very, very important to keep pace with industry around this issue, and also to make sure we have the workforce to set up that framework. I would make this a priority. I think right now, I listened to Acting Administrator Nolan. He talked about 2024 being ready around 2024. I would want to accelerate that. And I think we can do that. In Los Angeles, I created what I call an Office of Extraordinary Innovation to do just that, to work with industry to make sure that we entertain and look to implement various innovative things. And I think when we talk about advanced air mobility, that is a perfect example for one. So we would move that forward, and I commit to doing that.
I hope you, yeah, and I will just tell you in drafting this bill, Senator Warner and I worked to address the concerns of incumbent users of the NAS, especially those operating at lower altitudes, such as helicopters and agricultural aviation, which is very important in my state. However, I would say there's more work that needs to be done at the agency to ensure the safe coexistence of UAS with these stakeholders, and so I hope you will stay on top of it and work to get this done in a timely way. Let me just say, ask from your perspective, what should be done to ensure the safe coexistence of nascent, beyond visual line of sight operations with incumbent users at low altitude? You talk a little bit about what you think ought to be the solution.
Well, I think one solution is to make sure that the FAA itself is ready to implement that. One of my concerns is whether internally we are ready to take that on. I would want to make sure that we are. I would want to sit down with industry in partnering sessions to understand what the challenges are from their perspective, and to be ready to implement when they are ready, and keeping track of industry. So I would bring them in and sit down with them immediately to find out what the constraints are and what the challenges are, and move forward that way.
And you would work with the stakeholder community, make sure those
Yes.
concerns are addressed?
Yes, sir.
Doing that, okay. All right, well, let me go quickly here. Let me just, during my time as chairman of this committee, we considered and enacted the FAA Reauthorization Act of 2018 and included prioritization of next-gen upgrades to bolster the nation's air traffic control system. These upgrades, in addition to employing concepts such as dynamic airspace management, will allow the U.S. to better utilize existing infrastructure and increase the capacity and efficiency of the NAS. There's been a lot of recent, as we all know, ATC issues at airports across the country that certainly highlighted the need for modernization. So I know my time's up, but from your perspective, are there specific technology upgrades that should be prioritized to avoid preventable incidents like those which occurred in New York and in Austin?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Senator. Absolutely. I think the installation of new technology is one thing, but the integration of that technology is quite another thing. So the integration and the training of FAA employees is quite another thing. And I think we have to think about the integration. A lot of the installation is already done, but I'm concerned about the integration of that technology to use it to its full capacity.
Well, we need to catch up. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Thune. Senator Duckworth.
And thank you, Ranking Member Cruz, for holding today's hearing. I want to thank you, Mr. Washington, for your quarter century of service to our nation in uniform. It's said that the NCO is the backbone of the Army, and a backbone, a strong one, is exactly what you'll need to be FAA administrator, because you will need to stand up to pressures from aircraft manufacturers as well as from airlines looking to reduce or circumvent critical aviation safety requirements. There's a saying about aviation regulations that they're written in blood. When deadly accidents happen, we investigate and adjust our regulations to ensure whatever went wrong never happens again, but only after blood has been shed. Following the deadly Kogan air crash in 2009, which killed 50 people, Congress passed a law to require all commercial airline pilots to complete 1,500 flight hours. To its credit, the FAA has rejected all proposals to water down this key safety requirement. Sergeant Major Washington, when we spoke last year, we talked about my strong belief in the 1,500-hour rule, a belief that is not based on evidence, less emotion, and instead grounded in my own expertise as a pilot and also as a former commander of an Army aviation company where I was in charge of the training, the aviation training of my soldiers. We know how critical real-world flying experience is for safety. Look, I accept that there will always be those who want to give into the temptation to cut corners or buy into the false hope of a quick fix or an easy answer, especially when there is a critical aviation workforce shortage. But as chair of the Aviation Safety Subcommittee and an aviator, it's my responsibility to stand up for a basic safety principle. Hours in the cockpit are hours. Butts spent in the seat in the air cannot be replaced. No matter how many hours you spend in a lecture hall or in a simulator. Experience and expertise cannot be faked. These life-savings attributes are earned through hours of hard work and dedication to the craft of piloting a real aircraft in the air with real stakes. Mr. Washington, if confirmed to lead FAA, will you commit to defending the 1,500-hour rule and rejecting any proposal to weaken or water down what is really a common sense requirement that before we place the lives of commercial passengers in the hands of a new pilot, that pilot must first gain at least 1,500 hours of flight time?
Thank you for the question, Senator. If confirmed, I will not deviate from that standard. I agree with you that the 1,500-hour rule should stay in place. I have never, especially as a Command Sergeant Major, believed in lowering the standard. I believed in bringing people up to the standard, and that is very, very important. So I would not deviate from that standard.
Thank you. Simulators are important. Simulators are good, but simulators have a reset button where you get to be reborn again. It is not the same as being in a cockpit out there in icing environment, in windy environments. And I know you've trained many a soldier in a simulator, in many types of simulators. My second question for you, as we discussed last year, I remain concerned about the FAA's hesitancy to use its civil enforcement authority. There are two issues involving the Boeing 737 MAX that I find just stunning, but not in a good way. The first involves evidence that came to light as part of a congressional investigation, and I have a graphic that's up here. This is an internal Boeing memo documenting plans to avoid using the term MCAS outside of the company and instead merely describe the new function as an addition to the already existing speed trim system. The memo suggests a motive. If we, and I quote, if we emphasize MCAS is a new function, there may be greater certification and training impact, end quote. Even worse, the memo says this plan to downplay the significance of MCAS was approved by an authorized representative, which was a Boeing employee that FAA specifically authorized to conduct certification work on behalf of the agency. This is what I mean when I say you're going to have a strong backbone to the pressures from the industry. Yet FAA never investigated this internal Boeing memo, and I'm not aware of any FAA civil enforcement action against the responsible individuals. As you know, pilots' inability to arrest The MCAS ultimately led to 2 deadly MAX crashes, killing 346 people. The other issue is that apparently Boeing knew of the angle of attack disagree alert was inoperable on more than 80% of the 737 MAX aircraft, in direct violation of the plane's FAA-approved type design. Yet Boeing did not inform the FAA, air carriers, or MAX pilots of this for more than a year, and only did so after the first deadly MAX crash. Faulty angle of attack data was a factor in both MAX crashes, yet FAA, as it stands currently, does not appear to have taken any civil enforcement actions against Boeing for this. While I am pleased that the Department of Transportation's Inspector General is now examining FAA's handling of these issues, I fear this speaks to a broader reluctance at FAA to use its civil enforcement authority. Mr. Washington, will you commit to using FAA's full civil enforcement authority as appropriate?
Thank you for the question, Senator. Yes. I think I want to first acknowledge the role of the families in advocating for holding Boeing and FAA accountable. And if confirmed, I would do and foot stomp what has already been conveyed to Boeing. I would also reinforce to our workforce that they will always have the time to do what they need, and that includes civil enforcement.
I have a final question for the record. I'll submit for the record. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Budd.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Washington, thanks for being here today. I have some concerns with your nomination, but first of all, besides that, I just want to say thank you for your service to our country through our military. We have a lot of veterans, a lot of military installations in our state of North Carolina, and so we appreciate what you've done. Now, you've been nominated to lead an agency with authority to regulate aircraft, airspace, and airmen. The U.S. has some of the most complex airspace in the world. I mean, we've got over 200,000 registered aircraft, more than 1 million pilots in our country, and over 45,000 flights per day handled by ATC. Now, with recent issues under the Biden administration, from the flight disruptions over Christmas, the NOTAM, or the Notice to Air Missions ground stop, and the recent near miss incidents in New York, Texas, and just yesterday in Boston, my colleagues and I were concerned about the many or several parts of your background and your lack of aviation experience. Now, there's many new regulations that the FAA has issued or is in process of developing. Here's one, for instance. The FAA is spending billions of dollars on its next-gen program, as you're aware, to modernize the national airspace system. A key part of this update is moving towards GPS navigation for pilots and ATC. Now, as part of this transition, the FAA recently required airplanes to be equipped with an ADS-B transponder. So, Mr. Washington, can you quickly tell me what airspace requires an ADS-B transponder? Quickly, please.
Thank you for the question, Senator. Not sure I can answer that question right now.
That's okay. We'll just keep going. So that's a pretty important part. But another question. You've said that your national security background, and again, I appreciate your military experience there, but you say that's prepared you for this role. It's okay. The FAA has classified airspace to meet the needs of airports, air traffic, and also national security. The FAA has also designated special use airspace over DoD bases critical to national security. So what are the 6 types of special use airspace that protect this national security that appear on FAA charts? Quickly, please.
Sorry, Senator, I cannot answer that question.
Okay, we'll just keep going, so thank you.
Sure.
Since World War II, the FAA has required pilots to have a valid medical certificate. I've got one. In recent years, the FAA has relaxed these standards through the introduction of the Sport Pilot Certificate and also Basic Med. It's been a great success. More than 70,000 pilots in the last 6 years have used Basic Med to maintain their flying privileges. So what are the limits? It comes with some limitations. So what are the operational limitations of a pilot flying under Basic Med?
Well, thank you for the question, Senator. I'm not a pilot, so.
But obviously you'd oversee the Federal Aviation Administration. So any idea what those restrictions are under Basic Med, quickly?
Well, some of the restrictions, I think, would be high blood pressure. Some of them would be,
It's more like how many passengers per airplane, how many pounds in different categories, and what altitude you can fly under. So, and then amount of knots. It's under 250 knots. So, it's not have anything to do with blood pressure. So, let's keep going here. It's aviation. I've heard you talk about aviation and safety, and it being a particular concern of yours. I appreciate that. Stall spin accidents are a particular concern for general aviation safety advocates. Accidents involving an unintentional stall account for nearly 25% of fatal aviation accidents. And these happen at spins at low speed and low altitude, and they're particularly dangerous. Can you tell me what causes an aircraft to spin or to stall?
Again, Senator, I'm not a pilot, but I would lean on our career employees and our safety folks within the FAA.
Okay, let's keep going. So we've mentioned just recently, Senator before me mentioned the 737 MAX issues. So there are many questions surrounding the FAA's aircraft certification process. 2 years ago, Congress passed a major reform package to address these concerns. It's now up to FAA to implement these laws by issuing regulations and monitoring compliance. Mr. Washington, what are the 3 aircraft certifications the FAA requires as part of the manufacturing process? Quickly, please. 3 aircraft certifications.
Again, what I would say to that is that one of my first priorities would be to fully implement that Certification Act and report back to this committee.
You know the 3 types, Mr. Washington? The 3 types? Okay. Yeah, that's type certificate, production certificate, and airworthiness certificate. Okay, all right. Let's just keep going, see if we can get lucky here. All right, so just since January, the U.S. has narrowly averted 3 aviation disasters. On 3 separate occasions, airplanes came dangerously close to colliding on runways at New York JFK, Austin Bergstrom, and the Boston Logan Airport. The Austin incident reminded me of the Tenerife accident, which is the deadliest aviation accident in history. Both the incident at Tenerife and Austin involved 2 planes on a runway in dense fog. The FAA's ATC procedures manual has separation standards. Now, I know you run a big airport, so you should probably know this one here. It's got separation standards for planes using the same runway. So can you tell me what the minimum separation distance is for landing and departing airliners during the daytime, Mr. Washington?
I don't want to guess on that, Senator, but it would be easy for me to find out.
Thank you. You know, the FAA is woefully behind on integrating unmanned aircraft standards, but are you familiar with the difference between Part 107 and Part 44809 when it comes to unmanned aerial standards? Unmanned like drones, are you familiar with the difference?
Yes.
Okay, you know the difference between those 2, Part 44809 and Part 107? Do you know the difference there?
No, I cannot
That's okay.
spell that out for you.
Senator's time is
Yeah, thank you. You know, the FAA can't afford to be led by someone who needs on-the-job training, and for that reason, I'm going to be opposing your nomination, but thank you for your time.
Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you. Well, Mr. Washington, I appreciate your incredible career and experience. 24-year veteran of the U.S. Army, rose to the rank of Command Sergeant Major. That kind of experience, you have to adapt to a lot of changing circumstances, and I would assume make in-the-moment decisions all the time. And you work with the people around you to make those decisions.
Yes.
Is that right? And you also have been managing the 3rd biggest airport in the country, is that right?
Yes.
I actually am a big fan of airports. You're probably familiar with Minneapolis-St. Paul.
Yes.
We have been voted the best airport in the country a few times. I just want to point that out. Okay, so let's talk about, first of all, aviation workplace. I know you have done a lot of work on recruiting workers, which is a problem in the private part of our air service, in the public part of our air service. Talk a little bit about how we build the aviation workforce.
Thank you for the question, Senator. I think it's very, very important to do the things that I have been a part of for many, many years, and that is, again, showing a career pathway. I talked about that a little bit earlier. I would scale that up for aviation. I think the need is so great in all of infrastructure, but especially aviation. We're building a center of equity and excellence in aviation that has a career pathway portion to that. And so in addition to creating that pathway in aviation, I would go out and be the quote-unquote evangelist for aviation workforce opportunities all over this country. I think we need to do that, not just for aviation, but other modes as well.
All right, very good. The FAA's Contract Tower Program provides critical air traffic control safety benefits to 256 smaller airports around the country, including airports like St. Cloud, Minnesota, and Anoka County. It's a good deal for taxpayers, helps rural communities, supports military readiness and national security operations. If confirmed, you commit to ensuring that rural airports have the updated air traffic control towers and facilities they need to accommodate rising air traffic levels.
Thank you for the question, Senator. Absolutely. I'm committed to that and would love to work with you on that.
Very good, thank you. Passengers at airports experience significant travel disruptions, as you know, in January, due to the outage of the U.S. Notices to Air Missions, also known as NOTAM system. Senator Moran and I had a call with the acting administrator on this, and I lead legislation to require the FAA, which has also bipartisan support and has passed the House of Representatives, led by Representative Stauber, my colleague in Minnesota, to establish a task force to strengthen the resiliency and cybersecurity of the NOTAM system. We know that's not the only thing that needs to be done. We know there's going to be this transition to the next gen air traffic control, but if confirmed, you commit to making sure that we work with all stakeholders here to make sure that this transition works and that we do a better job.
Thank you for the question. Absolutely commit to working with stakeholders. Also commit to making redundancy of those systems a top priority as well.
Okay, very good. I think I'll ask my remaining questions. I see my colleague, Senator Rosen, who's such a leader on tourism, is here, and so I'm going to, after the Republican questions, turn over to her. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator Vance.
Great, thank you, Madam Chair, and Mr. Washington, thanks for being here. I want to ask just a threshold question here. So this is from the LA Metro Equity Platform. This is a graphic that appears, I believe, on the first page. And I understand this is something, the equity platform, you've supported over and over again in some of your public comments. I'd love for you to explain what this means.
Well, thank you for the question, Senator. Yes, we advocated and supported equity in a big way at LA Metro and every organization that I have been a part of. I think it's crucial for us to understand diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so what you're looking at is equity with everyone on a level playing field, if you will. And that is what we espoused at every organization that I've been in, especially LA Metro.
And what do these boxes represent, I guess? I mean, they're, equality here, they have different sized boxes, and then here, there are different boxes here. I'm just curious what this is supposed to mean.
Yeah. Well, that is, opportunity, if you will. Opportunity and how you position people that may be less fortunate for the same opportunities that other people might receive.
Okay, I got to say, Mr. Washington, I appreciate the attempt at an explanation there, but I don't fully understand why equality and equity are different. I would assume that equality of opportunity is something that we all believe in and agree with. Mm-hmm. I worry just in some of your public comments and some of the things that you've said, you tend to take this focus of explicitly saying that color blindness, of looking at people without regards to skin color, is somehow in and of itself discriminatory. And I was hoping to elucidate that a little bit by appeal to this chart and try to understand it a little bit better. But I have to be honest, and I'm not trying to be rude, Mr. Washington, I just don't fully understand what this is meant to convey and how it might influence some of your policies. In an effort to kind of drill down to that, I just want to ask just a few questions here, because the aviation industry is maybe the single industry where aptitude and where safety matter more than almost anything else. I mean, I can't imagine even going under the knife. I'd probably choose having a safe pilot as more important than even going under the knife for a surgery. So I just want to ask sort of how this criticism of color blindness that you've had in some remarks in your career intersect with how you think about the standards for pilots that exist in the aviation industry. So a few just very direct questions. Do you believe that white, black, and Latino airline pilots should be able to read, speak, and understand English before becoming commercial airline pilots?
Yes, I do.
Great, thank you. Do you believe white, black, and Latino airline pilots should have to hold the commercial pilot certificate and an instrument rating as they currently have to do?
Yes, I do.
Great. Do you believe that white, black, and Latino airline pilots should have to have at least 1,500 hours of total flight time in order to receive an airline transport license?
Yes, I do.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Washington. I appreciate that, and here's the reason why I ask those questions, because there is an inconsistency between some of the diversity, equity, and inclusion rhetoric on the one hand, and the fact that we should hold everybody to equal standards no matter what. I have 3 young children, a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 1-year-old. A couple of their grandparents live in San Diego, California, so they're on a flight a couple times a year at least. I'm actually totally supportive of what you might call a Rooney Rule here. I absolutely believe that if we take, black citizens or white citizens or anybody who hasn't had the same opportunities as everybody else, it's great to make that extra effort to ensure that they have the opportunity to become commercial airline pilots or federal administrators or whatever the case may be. What I worry about is that some of our aviation industry, some of the experts and some of the ideas centered around diversity, equity, and inclusion seem to take the idea that we should relax standards in an effort to promote certain groups of certain racial or gender categories. And I just think that's a terrible, terrible way to run an airline industry. I don't really care whether the pilot that I have, what their gender is, what their skin color is. I just care about whether they can do the job. And I hope that you're committed to the same exact attitude, because if we don't have safe airline pilots and if we relax the standards in an effort to get pilots of a certain skin color or a certain gender, it's going to be disastrous, quite literally. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Cantwell has left to vote, and so I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes to question the witness. And so before I begin my questions, I do want to take a moment to express my condolences to the families who were killed in the fatal crash of a medical transport flight near Stagecoach, Nevada on Friday. And I am so thankful for our first responders, for the hardworking people at the National Transportation Safety Board, who my team has been in touch with. We'll continue to follow it. Our hearts go out to those families. And I'd also briefly like to speak about concerns I have about the nominee's qualifications for the important position to which he's been nominated. Travel and tourism, the backbone of Nevada's economy. Our airports are the gateways to everything that we have to offer, everything that we do. And therefore, it is incredibly critical that we have an FAA administrator with deep experience promoting safe, efficient air travel. And so I do look forward in the coming weeks to learning more about your record, Mr. Washington, and whether you're adequately prepared for the position. And so I have a number of important policy questions to ask. First, I am also going to thank you for your service to this nation. We are indebted to you for that, and we thank you. And I'm going to turn to my questions. One of them is about airport obstruction analysis, and I'd hope you agree, just like all of us, safety of passengers' crew is the most important aspect of airport operations. Excuse me. This is equally true at Harry Reid International Airport in Las Vegas, which saw a record 52 million travelers in 2022. But our airport, like so many others across the country, have been left unable to raise critical safety and security concerns about nearby obstructions through FAA's current obstruction evaluation airport airspace analysis process. And I know it's a long title, but it is so important. We have to ensure that this obstruction analysis is robust, it involves all stakeholder input, and in particular, takes in the safety and security those concerns of their airports seriously. And so, Mr. Washington, if confirmed, how will you ensure that this obstruction analysis, this process, is sufficient to account for major concerns about our air and ground safety raised by airports and the TSA?
Well, thank you for the questions, Senator. I would certainly want to work with you on that. I understand that the analysis that FAA uses is primarily focused on the air traffic impacts versus the obstruction, and as opposed to the security concerns like the serious one that I know you advocate for. I appreciate you bringing it to our attention, and I would certainly want to work with you on that to get the details on traffic impacts versus obstruction.
Thank you. I want to move to something that is really, again, very important, is our airport. Harry Reid International Airport is kind of at the one end of the Las Vegas Strip, and Nevada quickly emerging as the sports capital of the nation. We're home to the Las Vegas Raiders, the NHL's Golden Knights, WNBA champions, the Aces. We hosted the NFL Draft. We're the next host of the Super Bowl, and we're going to be hosting Formula One Grand Prix in November. So we're really proud of all of our sports and entertainment, but this also makes us a target for bad actors, especially when individuals are gathered around our stadiums. I think Allegiant Stadium's about 65,000 seats there. And the FAA has imposed temporary flight restrictions over stadium events, including for drones. Congress has subsequently strengthened and codified these requirements. However, sports leagues have been reporting violations of flight restrictions by drones. And so if confirmed, this of course impacts the safety of everyone there. How will you ensure federal policy not only continues for these longstanding protections for stadiums, but really keeps evolving with these new threats as they continue to grow?
Thank you for the question.
Particularly the drones.
Right, yeah, thank you for that question. I would want to work with you on that to understand exactly what the issues are. There's a lot of interest in how drones will be integrated and how they will be used at airports around various government functions and facilities. If confirmed, I would certainly want to work closely with you on that and the topic under reauthorization as well.
Yeah, the drones are increasingly growing, and they're getting smaller and growing in strength, so we have to address that. I only have a few seconds left, so I'm just going to go quickly again on drones. Drone use for critical infrastructure inspection. There's bipartisan legislation I introduced with Senator Bozeman and Blumenthal authorizing $100 million in competitive grants, allow our cities local governments to purchase and operate small drones. They can go in and out of bridges and through tunnels, and they can take pictures and see things that might be more difficult for humans to get to. So we've been seeking technical assistance for some time. Will you commit to working with us, if confirmed, at the very least, to provide formal FAA feedback so we can use this technology for safety for our critical infrastructure?
Absolutely, Senator. Absolutely. Commit to working with you.
Thank you. I am going to now recognize Senator Schmidt for his questions.
Thank you, Senator. Mr. Washington, how are you?
Good, sir.
Good. The Biden administration recently announced equity czars in every department, in every agency. These czars, of course, haven't been authorized by Congress in any way, shape, or form, but will implement initiatives to deliver radical, quote, equitable outcomes. This really isn't about opportunity for all Americans, but mandating certain outcomes and virtue signaling, and a simple yes or no answer would be great. Do you intend, if you're confirmed, to have this so-called equity czar as a member of your senior staff at the FAA?
Thank you for the question, Senator. I do think that there's a role to play for equity in organizations, so I would definitely look at that.
So you will or you will not have this equity czar as a member of your senior staff? Yes or no?
I think an equity person is necessary, yes.
Okay. The stated mission, of course, of the FAA is to provide the safest, most efficient aerospace system in the world. There seems to be a real disconnect between that mission, what some of the FAA's current activities are, and quite frankly, your nomination. So let me recap for you just a couple of months in transportation aerospace news. The first complete ground stop of civilian air travel since 9/11 because of a complete meltdown of the NOTAM system, a train derailment in East Palestine that's slowly poisoning an Ohio community, several near misses of civilian and cargo planes at a Texas airport and a California airport. And I could keep going, but I think you get the point. And what is the Department of Transportation and the FAA focused on? Changing the name of the NOTAM system to be quote unquote more inclusive, and putting time and effort into woke pet projects, and putting time, and also at a time where they could be improving our antiquated systems. And I'll tell you right now, the folks in Missouri and more broadly, the American people don't care one bit if people are getting a pat on the back at a conference posted by some DEI consultant on the name change. They want pilots who have the safety information, the best pilots in the world, so the American public can travel efficiently and safely. Your prior record and what you've already testified here today shows that you'll be more focused on aggressively pushing woke DEI projects instead of actually ensuring the safety and efficiency across our aerospace system. These DEI projects that you spent your time pushing are left-wing advocates' dreams, and they're mind-boggling, quite frankly. First, requiring all procurement proposals at the Denver airport to have an equity plan, and furthermore, force those reviewing the contract proposals to, quote, look for DEI social, cultural merits as they consider contracts. And this is a yes or no question. Do you intend to make FAA staffers, if you're confirmed, look at the social, cultural merits of contracts if you're confirmed?
Safety will always be my #1 priority.
Right, but the question is, you did this at Denver, but are you going to require the social, cultural merits of contracts to be considered?
I think that's one of the factors that we need to look at along with everything else.
With safety? Does that have anything to do with safety?
Senator, safety is the #1 priority.
Okay. Just last year, you wanted a Center for Equity and Excellence built in Denver for $40 million. This center would have a, quote, hall of equity for training sessions. Simple yes or no, Mr. Washington. Do you think families in Denver or across the country are interested in spending millions and millions of dollars for halls of equity?
Thank you for the question, Senator. I think families in Denver are interested in safety at our airport. And I deliver that on a daily basis.
$40 million is a lot of money for halls of equity. You would agree with that, right? Is that really the most pressing issue?
I think one of the pressing issues is to make sure that we have a qualified workforce for years to come.
I would agree with that. Your record of pushing DEI and woke ideologies of the transit system you worked at is alarming. Last year, the Biden administration pushed a budget that listed as its priorities for the FAA in this order. First, climate change. Second, increasing equity. Then investments in safety and modernization. This emphasis matters. The FY 2023 FAA budget had over $570 million for equity, and then another $760 million for climate change projects to meet global standards set by the International Civil Aviation Organization. Simple yes or no. If confirmed as the FAA administrator, do you intend to use taxpayer dollars to prioritize equity and climate change over safety?
I am going to follow the law, Senator.
Well, that's not the law, because Congress certainly hasn't voted on that. So are you going to prioritize those two as the president has indicated he would like to?
Safety will be #1 for FAA.
Okay. And let me just close with this. I'll tell you that the folks in Missouri aren't interested in spending billions on halls of equity. They don't want decisions made on social, cultural merits. They don't want $500 million spent on undefined equity projects. They don't want a woke globalist ideological agenda thrust upon them by unelected bureaucrats at the FAA. And so this is our only opportunity to speak for them, because you're not elected. They want safety. They want reliability. They want affordability. And I am concerned the FAA has lost its way, and your track record seems to indicate that you're much in line with this prioritization of diversity, equity, inclusion, climate change over safety, and that is very concerning to me.
Senator Markey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Washington. During Mr. Washington's 24-year career in the United States Army, he achieved the rank of Command Sergeant Major. No one understands safety better than a Command Sergeant Major. That's what they exist for, to protect all of the people who work for them and everyone that those people are trying to protect. And that's the job that Mr. Washington is being considered for. Okay, and I have no doubt that he understands exactly what his job will be, to make safety number one, because his training shows that he's got the background. He served as the Chief of Operations for the Logistics Division and the Chief of the Human Capital Division, roles that require superlative diligence, vigilance, and commitment to detail. Mr. Washington has an exceptional track record of delivering major infrastructure projects on time and under budget in Denver and in Los Angeles, as a Command Sergeant Major would. Mr. Washington is a dedicated public servant, proven leader who makes the trains and the planes run safely and on time. There's just far too much at stake to play politics with this nomination, with skyrocketing flight cancellations, multiple near-miss collisions at airports, including one at Logan Airport on Monday of this week. We need a permanent FAA administrator, somebody who knows what they are doing. And Mr. Washington is the right person for this job at this time. I want to turn to climate change's impact on the aviation industry, from melting runways in London to Southwest Airlines holiday meltdowns. Climate change is significantly impacting our aviation system. Mr. Washington, do you agree that climate change poses new challenges for airlines, airports, and the FAA?
Senator, yes, I do.
Just for the record, there was a report out just a few weeks ago that Burlington, Vermont, for example, is 7 degrees Fahrenheit warmer today than it was in 1970. Can I say that? That's Burlington, Vermont, 7 degrees warmer. You translate that all across the country in the years to come, that's fundamental in the risks that are going to be posed to the infrastructure of our airports. Just this morning, we saw new Brookings research that found that airports are under dire threat from climate change. And I'd like to enter this concerning research into the record concerning that study, Madam Chair.
Without objection.
And that's why I'm working on legislation to improve the resiliency of our aviation system, particularly at our airports. And I look forward to working with my colleagues on that issue. And I want to turn to, if I may, another issue related to airport resiliency: airport service workers. Those individuals are the unsung heroes of our aviation system, but they are often overworked and underpaid. Our airports would not function if wheelchair attendants, concession workers, ramp agents, and baggage handlers did not do their jobs. They're the hidden figures in ensuring that airports work. They're not the pilots walking through in their beautiful uniforms. They're just the people that show up at 4 a.m. in the morning to make sure that the airports function all day long. Mr. Washington, do you agree that airport service workers are critical to the operation and reliability of our aviation system?
Senator, absolutely.
Last Congress, I introduced the Good Jobs for Good Airports Act, which would help ensure that airport service workers are paid a living wage and benefits. It's time we repay the sacrifices of airport service workers. We give a lot of federal money every single year to airports across this country. We just got to make sure it goes down to these workers. They're largely of color, They're women, and they're not wealthy at all. And we have to make sure that they get the resources they need to take care of their families the same way they take care of ours. So, Mr. Washington, we're going to work very hard to get you confirmed. We need you on the job right now. You've spent your whole life getting ready for this job. You'll be a superior FAA administrator.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. Senator Fisher.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Welcome, Mr. Washington. First of all, thank you for your many years of military service. I congratulate you on those years when you defended this country and the citizens. Thank you, sir. On March 10th, 2022, SkyWest filed a 90-day notice of its intent to terminate service at 29 essential air service communities. At the time, Nebraska had 3 communities that were served by SkyWest: Kearney, North Platte, and Scottsbluff. Essential air service is critical for our rural communities. So how will you ensure that EAS communities will be served when regional carriers struggle to find those pilots if you are confirmed?
Thank you for the question, Senator. That would be one of my top priorities. I would look to work with you and your office on that. I think the FAA has done some work around EAS and the grants that are subsidized in that area, and I would continue that work.
Will FAA commit to continuing issuing the hold-in orders to ensure that carriers meet their contractual obligations in providing service to rural communities?
Yes, Senator.
SkyWest has applied for a Part 135 charter to help better serve these EAS communities, but there's a backlog at FAA. Do you know what the average time is for FAA to process new Part 135 applications, and what would you do as an administrator to address that?
Thank you for the question, Senator. One of the things I want to look at is all of the timelines to process things like that, rulemaking, all across the board. I think that we can improve upon that. I think that in terms of rulemaking, it takes far too long, even internally, from what I've seen. And so I will make that a priority to move those things along.
Yeah, you know, these applications that I referenced here, they're really vital to be able to get those out so that not just the carrier knows what's going on, but these small rural communities where essential air service is exactly that. It's essential air service. And as I said, we have many of those across the state of Nebraska, and to be able to serve not just the people in the communities, but commerce, to keep rural America vital and strong, this has to be a priority. It has to be addressed.
Yes, and I agree with that.
In post-pandemic travel, we've seen an increase in that, and many travelers have experienced flight cancellations and delays. Following these situations, we usually see, you know, a bunch of finger pointing between the airlines and air traffic control. Does FAA have a staffing shortage for air traffic controllers?
It's one of the things that I want to look at, Senator. One of the questions I have is what goes into the staffing model to determine what the headcount is. Is it being staffed to traffic, or is it being staffed to budget? And I think what is input into the model determines what's spit out of the model in terms of the number of headcount. And so I want to understand what is being input into the model. I don't know that now, but that'll be one of the first things that I take a look at. I talk to air traffic controllers at my airport. There's a huge ramp-up time with regard to the on-the-job training for that airport. And so it's the same thing in ground transportation. You ramp up according to the service you want on the street, and it's the same thing with controllers as well.
You know, just to note here, last year, FAA opened the application only one time for the general public to apply for those air traffic control training areas. Do you think that that application should be open more often? What kind of changes would you specifically suggest for that?
Thank you for the question, Senator. I want to look at continuous openings. There's a lot of positions,
And continuous training then as well, or you have to reach a critical mass with applications before you do the training?
Yes, I think we need to do both. I think we need to have a continuous recruitment, and I think we need to look at training year-round.
My time is up, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Senator Lujan.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate the time. Mr. Washington, thank you for being here, and thank you for your service, sir. My state of New Mexico is a destination to many who come on out to get to our mountains or experience our public spaces, fall in love with New Mexico. And there's programs out there like Essential Air Service, as have been spoken about today, that provide critical connections to our rural communities as well. And this time of year, while many of out-of-state visitors are coming to ski up in Taos or Santa Fe or other ski areas, many are coming for family reasons or even national security reasons to NNSA, National Department of Energy laboratories, or military installations, the Space Satellite Operations Office. Now, on my way back home to New Mexico, I spend a good amount of time at Denver International Airport. Sometimes I think I spend a little too much time there, but nonetheless, it helps to get me home. And no hard feelings to my colleagues on the committee, but our runways don't melt in New Mexico. Our runways don't freeze on over and things of that nature. So what I want to ask is, understanding that some of these airlines have not brought back flights to pre-pandemic levels, is, if confirmed, what steps will you take to not only bring back pre-pandemic levels, but to increase service to growing economies like Albuquerque or other airports that are not experiencing the same kind of weather challenges that others in the region are experiencing?
Well, thank you for the question, Senator. I definitely would like to work with you on that. In Denver, the airport was built for 50 million annual passengers. We're at 70 million right now, and we're looking at 100 million in the next 5 to 8 years. And so this is a factor of making sure your airport can accommodate those increased numbers. And so I would want to work with you on working with airlines to increase those. I mean, it's not FAA's primary sort of job. I mean, it's there was a mention of Africa a little bit earlier, but that was a proactive way to get direct flights to the continent of Africa. And so many times the airport team has to do that themselves to go out and sell their region in terms of tourism and all those things, but would love to work with you on that.
I look forward to learning from you in that space and many others, Mr. Washington. Now, there unfortunately is growing agreement that many air carriers did not sufficiently prioritize consumer protections. One area where some articles that I've read disturb me greatly are parents of young children. And they describe horrific stories where their children got too hot, overheated, heat stroke, because those planes get really hot if they're stuck on the tarmac, for example. And so while the 2010 tarmac delay rule helped immensely, there's still concerns that I have about occupant safety. And so if confirmed as FAA administrator, do you commit to working with me on this issue as well?
Absolutely, Senator. This is under the authority of the Secretary's office, but obviously I would work with you and the Secretary's office in coordinating that.
I appreciate that very much. Now, one last question that I have is around the commercial space industry, which is poised for explosive growth in the coming years, including Spaceport America in New Mexico out in Sierra County. Now, the FAA and the Office of Commercial Space Transportation are critical in the support of this new era of space exploration. And while the FAA received increased funding in recent years to increase workforce and improve its process for licensing and permits, I continue to hear the lack of personnel employed or trained to meet the rise in commercial space launch and recent operations. If confirmed, can you commit to prioritizing hire additional employees at FAA, review this, all in support of space commercial travel?
Thank you for the question, Senator. I can commit to making sure that we have the resources in place to meet the challenge around commercial space. And so I commit to that.
I appreciate that. And I imagine that there'll be a bipartisan effort to work closely with you in that space as well. And I hope to work closely with my friends and colleagues from my neighbor to the east in Texas, as well as other places around the United States. Madam Chair, thank you for this hearing, for this time. And again, Mr. Washington, I look forward to your confirmation.
Senator Young.
Welcome, Mr. Washington.
Thank you, sir.
Sir, I really appreciate your military service. As someone who wore the uniform for a bit of time myself, I really have great respect for what you accomplished in the military. I have to tell you, as we look at your nomination to serve in this capacity, I'm quite concerned about your lack of aviation and aviation safety experience. And this administration has been on watch when we've seen our first nationwide ground stop since 9/11. And this was due to problems with the FAA's very own system. So that's the organization that you've been nominated to lead. We've had multiple near misses in recent months. The FAA's own website states that the FAA's mission is to provide the safest, most efficient aerospace system in the world. So we need someone who can ensure that it fulfills that mission. The most efficient, safest aerospace system in the world. As you know, federal law requires that the FAA administrator, that position that you've been nominated for, must, among other things, have experience in the field directly related to aviation. And I'm looking at your resume. It's right here. And it's really impressive. So I let the world know that the man before this committee is really impressive, an honorable record of service and without blemishes to my knowledge. But it's thin by my reading as it pertains to this direct aviation experience. You spent a lot of time in the U.S. Army. Your career was focused on, per your resume, logistics, HR, training, and operations. You weren't an Army pilot. You didn't work in aviation units. Your very first, roughly 40 years ago, your very first assignment as an enlisted soldier was an air defense artillery unit. I worked with an unmanned aerial vehicle squadron when I was in the U.S. Marine Corps. That certainly didn't qualify me, to my mind, to be FAA administrator. In recent years, you spent a few years as CEO of LA Metro Transport Authority, but they oversaw rail and bus transit. It doesn't, no mention here at least of aviation responsibilities. And then for the last roughly 18 months, you've been CEO of Denver International Airport. And I've visited with CEOs of airports, and they vary in expertise and accomplishment and proficiency. And but I know that so much of that job involves ensuring that the tenants in that shopping area with multiple purposes in addition to aviation remain happy, and that the customers going in and out are happy. But so 18 months. Maybe there's been an 18-month marination in aviation since you've been CEO of Denver Airport. But I'm going to give you an opportunity, as so often does not happen in these hearings, to explain concisely, if you will, why you are qualified for this job, sir.
Thank you for the question, Senator. I think about a few things. In running ground transportation units, I was not a train operator either, but I was named the best public transportation CEO in this country. I think about traits like leadership. I think about traits like managing. I think about traits like convening people to get things done. I think about what I call adaptive leadership. Aviation right now, we cannot think about doing things the old way. And so I think that a fresh perspective is needed. Obviously, safety is number one. And as I said earlier, leaning and trusting and directing our safety experts is part of the job. But I think that there is my broad transportation knowledge and real-world leadership experience of both military and transportation infrastructure systems serve me well.
And I have no doubt, sir, that you are in many respects a plug-and-play leader and manager. This is something that our senior enlisted and much of our officer corps, I think, can correctly and accurately identify as. So I want to sort of validate that for what it's worth. I will say that statutorily, this position requires having experience in the field that is directly related to aviation. Words have meaning, statutes have meaning, and it's unclear at this point. We'll continue to do homework, give you an opportunity maybe after this hearing to elaborate on what you've just said. It's unclear that your background, as I've laid it out, is directly related to aviation. So thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Senator Baldwin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Washington, welcome to the committee. And thank you for both your service to this nation in the military as well as your continued commitment to public service. I want to talk a little bit about the pilot workforce and pilot shortages and opportunities that may be presented to us right now. I understand that less than 10% of licensed pilots are women. The Women in Aviation Advisory Board released a report last year that included a recommendation that Congress provide additional financial tools for careers in aviation. In pursuit of that goal, I've been working on legislation that would raise the level of federal student loan availability for those who wish to become pilots, and I plan to introduce that measure in coming weeks. But I'm wondering if you believe that additional financial tools like student loans may help women and other underrepresented groups enter the aviation workforce, and also given your recognition in 2017 for advancing women in transportation more generally, how do you plan to continue that important work as administrator of the FAA?
Well, thank you for the question, Senator. This has been a huge priority and passion of mine. During my time in Los Angeles, my 6 years there, 49% of the promotions during that time was for women. We stood up a Women and Girls Governing Council to understand how women travel and ways to improve the system as it relates to the traveling of women. And so this has been really, really huge for me. I feel like I can bring a different perspective to the aviation mode around how to attract women and people of color. I do think it's very, very important that our workforce looks like the people that we serve. And I will do that and look forward to working with your office on that as well.
Thank you. You know, I also believe that our nation's military veterans will continue to play a vital role in our aviation workforce. And I will be reintroducing a bipartisan bill that I have with Senator Hoeven called the American Aviator Act, which would authorize grant funding through the FAA to support training opportunities for veterans who are not already military pilots but wish to become pilots in their civilian careers. Given your recognition for supporting military veterans, as well as your background as a non-commissioned officer in the military, how do you plan to use those decades of leadership, frankly, in transportation agencies to advance the careers of other military veterans?
Well, thank you for the question. I would be a walking billboard for veterans to come into aviation. And so I mentioned earlier transit assistance programs that are at every military base. And these are for veterans that are leaving service, really focusing on them and or those programs. Pilots are one thing, but I also think about mechanics. I also think about those skill sets that keep the aircraft in the air. So I would be huge on that, and it would be a huge priority.
Well, thank you for that. So you're CEO of the third busiest airport in the country, if not the world. I'm not sure which, but or both.
The world.
The world. All right. So you know the vital role that our airports play in ensuring communities, can access national airspace. I want to talk about smaller airports for a second. I represent the state of Wisconsin, and would you be able to share your perspectives on the role that small and middle-sized airports, including most of what we have in the state of Wisconsin, how do we make sure that they are able to continue to play, to serve all of our communities? Because I worry about that when I hear of airlines leaving some of the smaller airports or cutting down service significantly.
They play a critical role in connecting to the national system. They play a critical role in connecting small communities. I've heard the issue about cold weather and AIP funding after the construction season has ended. So I would look for ways that the FAA can be flexible and very supportive in small airport locales.
Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And I want to commend you, Mr. Washington, on your the career that you have had. Being a command sergeant major is quite an accomplishment, and it is something that the FAA will probably need at this time, because so many people in Tennessee that I talk with feel like we are in an aviation crisis. The Chinese spy balloon, the NOTAM issues, some of the near misses in the air, including a JetBlue flight from Nashville to Boston earlier this week that escaped a near miss. And they are really concerned about why Secretary Buttigieg would prioritize environmental justice and climate change in his 2023 budget framework. And it seems that safety should be the top priority and not these other issues. And I know we've discussed that, different members have discussed that today, but I want to go back to that changing the name of the NOTAM system from airman to mission, and ask you if you think that was worth all of the personnel time that went into that and all the many documents that had to be altered to make that change. And do you feel that that was an appropriate use of the department's time and resources at a time when we're dealing with these issues that deal with the flying public, with air cargo?
Thank you for the question, Senator. Safety would always be my number one priority, and I have reiterated that. It was my number one.
Sir, that's not my question to you. I said, do you think it was appropriate? There is a time and place for everything. And you have to pick priorities. Should that be the priority? Should DEI be the priority at a time when people are concerned about safety in air travel?
I was not a part of that decision, so I hesitate to.
Well, do you see it as a priority? I'm asking your opinion.
I see
And that's a simple question, yes or no. Was it appropriate?
It is a priority, but
Okay.
it does not overcome safety.
Okay, so then let me ask you this, and you can just give me answers to these questions in yes or no. I've been concerned with, as we look at some of what has happened during your time at the Denver International Airport. Diversity, equity, inclusion was named as one of the airport's 4 guiding principles. The airport proposed reforms along these lines to incorporate DEI policies into its procurement process. Concerning these changes, you stated, and I'm quoting, "These new practices will enrich our process to identify the best partners to award contracts to, so that across all our efforts and at every level, we are integrating values of equity, diversity, inclusivity, accessibility, and sustainability into our business," end quote. So, yes or no, are airports racist? And is the FAA racist?
I don't believe they are.
Well, thank you for that. If confirmed, do you plan to implement similar DEI requirements for the FAA procurement process?
Not my plan right now. I want to take a look.
Okay, but you can't answer me yes or no. See, people are concerned about safety. Do you know, on the average, how long procurement processes take for the FAA?
I do not have that information, no.
Okay. Do you believe that extending DEI provisions into this will require additional rules to a process that is already a very long and convoluted process?
I do not, Senator.
Okay. Let me talk to you for just a second about drones, because we're concerned about the Chinese military industrial complex and DJI. Have you used DJI drones at the LA Metropolitan Airport or the Denver Airport?
No.
You have not. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Madam Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Washington.
Thank you. Thank you. Senator Sullivan.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Mr. Washington, thank you for being here. I want to just hit, I know we've been talking about safety and your background. Obviously, given all the challenges and the focus that everybody in the country wants in terms of safety, I, like so many others, have a deep respect for your service in the Army. Command Sergeant Major is really remarkable in terms of achievement. But I want you to take the opportunity to address what Senator Budd mentioned was, but your resume doesn't reflect a deep well of experience on aviation safety. And I think it's a fair criticism. He said, hey, you can't have on-the-job training on something so important. So why don't you take a minute to just address that? I think it's an important issue for the whole country. Then I want to talk about Alaska.
Thank you, Senator. I think safety is more than just one individual. It takes an organization. Can we build a safety culture within an organization? I have done that in every organization I've been in. I will do that at FAA. Safety has been my #1 priority in the United States Army and every transportation organization I've been in. So I think the question, at least in my mind, is can I build that culture and rebuild that culture within FAA? based on everything that I've done, based on how I have led men and women in this country? And I think the answer is yes.
Okay. You ever been to Alaska?
Yes, sir.
During the Army?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so you get a sense of, well, let me ask you, if you're confirmed, I'd like to get your commitment to come to Alaska very early in your tenure to see the unique challenges that we have in my state. Can I get you to commit to me on that?
Absolutely.
Good. Let me just give you a little bit of the dynamics there in terms of aviation. We have 586,000 square miles of land mass. Sorry, Senator Cruz. But almost two.
Point of personal privilege.
Sorry. But almost over 2.4 million square miles of airspace. That is the Alaska area that the FAA covers. As you know, the FAA, and I'm going to focus on domestic issues, but the FAA in Alaska is the entity that takes every flight in America that's flying to Asia, and it makes sure they get there safely. So our FAA guys and women, they do amazing work. They're the best. And everybody in America who's flown from America to Asia has had the FAA of Alaska in their guiding hands. It's really important. I just want to do a shout out to them. We're also a state with less road miles than Connecticut, and we're 120 times bigger.
Wow.
Over 250 communities in my state are not connected by roads. That's a whole nother issue. So they're connected by air or boat if they're on a river. So let me just go into a couple issues that relate to that. Because we fly so much, in 2020, the NTSB produced a report that in the most recent 10-year period, there was an accident rate for aviation in Alaska 2.35 times higher than in the rest of the country. So this is the challenge of air, weather, mountains, remote communities, but it's also very much a challenge of a lack of aviation infrastructure. I worked with the last FAA administrator to launch the FAA Alaska Aviation Safety Initiative, FASI. Can you commit to me, if you're confirmed, to continue the progress we've made, but we have a long way to go on the issue of FASI and Alaska safety, which, as I mentioned, we have the worst rates of accidents in the country by far.
Yes, Senator, enthusiastically look forward to working with you on that.
Let me ask one final question, Madam Chair, if I may. Weather reporting, forecasts, air-to-ground comms are needed to support these remote communities for better and safer access. The FAA, until I passed a law in this committee essentially mandating them to do it, had not funded new automated weather observing system locations in Alaska that most airports in the lower 48 get since the 1990s. Again, we're this afterthought. Can I get your commitment, if you're confirmed, to work with me on significantly updating the basic aviation and weather infrastructure that most states in the lower 48 take for granted and we have to beg for, to get those so my constituents can fly safely the way everybody else does in this country?
I commit to that, Senator.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Sullivan, and I too share your concerns about making sure that the Alaska air transportation system is the transportation system of Alaska. So
thank you.
Appreciate that. Senator Welch.
Mr. Washington, I think if I were you, I'd consider this hearing a success. You just got an invitation to Alaska.
Can't beat that.
I've never been there.
Well, if you're up for Senate confirmation, you'll get it.
Well, I can always aspire. Mr. Washington, one of the things among your many responsibilities will be the implementation of the Department of Transportation's ambitious U.S. Aviation Climate Action Plan, which has as a goal to achieve net zero carbon emissions in the aviation sector by 2050. And obviously, electric aviation has to be part of that conversation. Can you comment on your commitment to that and how you would implement it?
I am committed to that. I am committed to the administration's 2050 push for that. I think there are a number of ways that we can get started on that. I'm not saying FAA is not started on that, but I think we can beat 2050. I would make that one of my priorities. At Denver International Airport, we're doing just that. We're plugging abandoned oil wells. We have a huge solar array, larger than most airports. We are doing a number of sustainability projects like PFAS right now. Absolutely commit to that.
And do you see electric airplanes as part of that? We have a Beta Technologies in Vermont that is doing extremely wonderful work with EV aviation.
I do. I see eVTOLs as a huge part of that, and I think we need to get started now on making sure that the airports have the infrastructure that these vehicles can actually land. Nobody talks about the facilities that are needed at the airports now to make sure we can accommodate them.
Yeah, elaborate a bit on that, because that is a very good insight. If we don't have that infrastructure, then we might have the vehicles, but we won't be able to recharge them. What's involved in that?
Yes, well, I think there's a number of things involved with it. You know, there's something called giga hubs these massive EV charging facilities that is being talked about right now. As a matter of fact, I think we're ahead of the curve on that at Denver International Airport to install an installation like that in conjunction with the consolidated rental car facility that we want to build as well.
Thanks. And small airports, you know, Vermont is the biggest airport we have is a small airport, it's Burlington, and it's 100 times larger than any of the other airports, but those are essential. We also have an airport that we share in Lebanon, New Hampshire, that serves both local Vermont and local New Hampshire. Can you tell me how you're going to maintain or improve our confidence in the viability and sustainability of our small airports?
Well, I think, one, that those smaller airports and mid-sized airports are very, very critical to, again, connecting rural communities. And so, you know, I think we can look at some of the same things that we're doing at larger airports, maybe at a smaller scale. But I think there are many ways that we can take advantage of new technology and maybe even pilot some of those at smaller airports.
Well, I'm glad you said that about rural airports, because, you know, the models that the airlines are using really leave the rural America on the side, which I think is really bad. And what I'm hearing you say is that you appreciate the absolute essential importance of these small airports to rural Vermont, but to rural America.
Yes, sir.
And tell me what tools you would have to help us maintain service in our rural communities.
Well, I think, you know, there are various things like pilot training that we can have at smaller airports. There's things like emergency medical operations that we can have at smaller airports to make them even more useful for both the FAA and the airlines. And so those are the kinds of things that I would look at to make it more viable. Now, you know, I understand, and I mentioned earlier, the construction season and things like that we have to be concerned about when we put out AIP money and that sort of thing. But I think there's opportunities.
Okay. Thank you very much. And I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator Capito.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Washington, for being here with us today. We've seen a number of troubling events, and I'm sure these have been gone over in the commercial aviation, from the ground stop to 5 near misses, one of which was just in Boston on Monday. And so I have, obviously, I think everybody does, and certainly you share the concerns over a potential disaster here. Do you think the workforce policies are a contributing factor at FAA? And would you commit to having the FAA workforce return in person 5 days a week? Because our testimony from several weeks ago said that's not occurring right now.
I want to understand what the direction of the administration is around that. Now, I do think that the critical nature of FAA work, we need folks there. And folks are already there, those safety critical positions, and they have been there through the pandemic, and we need to not forget about them who have been there at every airport in the country. But I want to understand exactly where the FAA is on that, and I would look very, very closely. I'm a traditionalist in that respect in terms of 5 days a week.
Thank you, sir. Let me ask you this. You've been at Denver Airport for 2 years now?
Yes, almost, yes.
How often do you go to the air traffic control tower to just see what's going on?
Quite often, Senator.
Is that like once a week or?
I go there, not once a week, but quite often throughout the year.
Have you been in a rural air traffic control tower to see the differences?
I have not, Senator.
I would think in light of what the senator from Vermont was talking about. I'm from a small state. I'm from West Virginia, small state as well. The mountain states, a little challenging for aviation. So those smaller towers, I think, are exceedingly important to the overall safety of our air traveling public. Let me ask you about foreign repair stations. There is an uptick in the utilization of foreign repair stations for airline maintenance. Congress mandated that these stations are supposed to have the same standards as our domestic repair facilities. And obviously, we would know how important that is. But in reality, they really are not. There are reports that some have gone years without FAA inspection, and that many do not even have drug or alcohol testing requirements. How do you see the role of foreign repair stations in light of the FAA?
Thank you for the question, Senator. It's very, very critical. You mentioned FAA inspections being overdue.
Yes.
I would want to look at that and find out why that is so, and make sure that we get up to date on those. But I think it's very, very critical that that we satisfy the congressional mandate in that area.
I mean, I think obviously I would wholeheartedly agree with that, even if that would mean hiring extra inspectors to fulfill that obligation. I think that's exceedingly important as well. Yes. In terms of, there's been some of the pushback on your nomination, you're well aware, and I think you addressed it in your statement, is that you don't have you're not a pilot, you haven't had aviation experience. The last confirmed FAA administrator had extensive pilot and airline experience. What's the one thing that you would say to sort of knock that down as a requirement for the job?
Thank you, Senator. Leadership. Leadership, I think, is the top attribute that I would point to, because I think if you can lead people, then you can motivate your experts who are, whether they're pilots, whether they're safety technicians. I think leadership is a key piece of not just FAA, but it's a key piece of everything we do, including the United States Senate.
Well, I'm sure that a lot of the leadership skills that you have were formulated in your long service in our military, and I, as an American, am very grateful for that service. So thank you for that, and thank you for being with us here today. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Sinema.
Thank you, Chair Cantwell, and thank you, Mr. Washington, for your years of public service, including 24 years of service in the U.S. Army. The aviation challenges of the past months demonstrate that our nation's aviation system needs steady leadership, and we've had acting leaders at many important FAA positions for too long. We do need a Senate-confirmed administrator. And while it's vitally important to have these positions filled, in my role as senator to provide advice and consent I want to ensure that we have the right people in these positions. As you know, the FAA has a $24 billion budget, about 45,000 employees, and the responsibility to oversee the most complex aviation system in the world. And as we work to implement the bipartisan infrastructure law and pass a new FAA reauthorization bill, the next administrator will have the responsibility to see that these laws are implemented effectively and appropriately. Now, Mr. Washington, the first criteria that I use to provide my advice and consent for an executive branch nominee is to determine whether or not they have the requisite experience to perform the role for which they've been nominated. I recognize your significant experience in the U.S. Army and your experience leading public transit agencies. You have comparatively less experience working in aviation, having become the CEO of Denver International Airport in June of 2021. Aviation experience is important for this position, and as you know, the federal law listing the requirements for the FAA administrator states that the nominee must have experience in a field directly related to aviation. If you could, describe to me your aviation experience and how that experience provides you the background to be an effective FAA administrator.
Well, thank you for the question, Senator. I point to a number of things. The first thing I point to is my current role, and you mentioned 20 months, 24 months, whatever. I think that is relevant. I think that is relevant, understanding the massive airport that we have. So that's one. I think all of the things that we have been talking about today, safety, understanding infrastructure delivery methods, understanding massive projects, because we're going to have to build more airports, more airport infrastructure as more and more people actually fly. I think about the decision-making we have to make. I think about, again, the leadership piece. I think about the airport perspective that I bring to the table. I think about the understanding of governments and how to lead folks. I think about the convening ability that I have with regard to Department of Defense, regard to FCC on the 5G issue. All of these issues, I think, are relevant to the experience that's needed for the FAA.
Thank you. This committee held a hearing last week to examine the NOTAM system, which experienced technical issues in January. That disruption resulted in the first nationwide ground stop of air travel since September 11th attacks. In turn, 1,300 flights were canceled, over 10,000 flights were delayed, and that disrupted air travel for tens of thousands of travelers. Congress asked the FAA to update the NOTAM system in 2012, and here we are 10 years later, only halfway through this one project. The FAA has told us that these NOTAM fixes aren't expected to be completed until the year 2030, 18 years after Congress has directed these changes. I see this NOTAM problem as one symptom of our slow progress on modernizing our air traffic control. We spent lots of money and many years, but we haven't seen sufficient benefits to the system. The FAA needs an administrator to help us improve our air traffic control and provide airspace users the benefits they've been promised. So if confirmed to the role, what approach would you take to address these concerns?
Thank you for the question, Senator. I think some of the challenges that the FAA has is sort of a direct correlation to small things impacting big things. The fact that a file was deleted leads directly to safety, a safety issue. My work in modernizing systems, both in the United States Army and in transportation organizations, will help with that. Speaking of modernization of IT systems, one of my assignments was the non-commissioned officer in charge of the information management systems for all of U.S. Army Europe. And so I think these small things that impact really big things are the things that we are going to experience in the aviation field going forward.
Thank you, Chair Cantwell.
Thank you. Senator Warnock, are you ready? I know you just walked in, so I want to give you a second if you're not.
Sure. Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Many of you have heard about the 4 Ps of Georgia: poultry, peanuts, pecans or pecans. how we say it in Georgia, and peaches. Well, I'd like to add a fifth, P, planes. And with respect to my colleagues in North Carolina and Ohio and elsewhere, I would like to say that Georgia is the nation's most important aviation state. Georgia is home, after all, to the world's busiest airport, Atlanta Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport. The state's top export is aerospace products, which also happens to be the state's second largest manufacturing industry. So we're proud of that in Georgia, and it's an industry that's responsible for an economic impact of over $57 billion. Mr. Washington, as you know, the aviation industry has recently been plagued with a series of high-profile disruptions and dangerous near misses, including the NOTAM system outage, Southwest holiday meltdown that made Christmas not so happy for a lot of folks, and close calls on runways in New York, Texas, and California. Each of these instances threatens the safety and economic viability of the aviation industry, the success of which many Georgians and Americans rely on so heavily. If confirmed as FAA administrator, how will you ensure the smooth and safe operation of airports and airlines across the country?
Thank you for your question, Senator. Running the third busiest, not the first, but the third busiest airport in the world, I can tell you that I'm acutely aware of the disruptions. These are serious events. When this occurred during the disruption, I immediately called for after-action reviews during the disruption. And my whole career is evolved around safety. And so I think we need to speed up the redundancy issues around NOTAM. I think we need to look at the other redundancy issues around the other systems as well and make sure we do not have one point of failure for these various systems. I agree with what the interim administrator called sort of a safety stand-down just maybe a week ago. I think that's needed, but this would obviously be one of my huge priorities.
And tell me a little bit about that. Safety, of course, is very important. Yeah. But some of the other issues raised by these incidents is just the issue of consumer protection.
Yes.
And how you make customers whole when these kinds of things occur. Have you, tell me about your thoughts around that, and what will you do to improve consumer protections for air travelers, making the experience more predictable and enjoyable, and so that users of the aviation space don't, consumers don't feel like they've been taken for a ride that they didn't pay for.
Right. Thank you for the question, Senator. I think that responsibility, of course, lies in the Secretary's office, but I would work with him and the Secretary's office to make sure that consumer protections were covered. I spend every day at my airport in Denver talking directly with travelers, and I mentioned in my opening statement that as the disruption occurred during the holiday period, people didn't ask me did I have direct aviation experience. They asked me where their luggage was. And so I will always be on the watch for consumer protection issues and working with the Secretary's office on that.
Okay. In the little bit of time I have remaining, I want to switch topics altogether. I introduced the Aviation Emissions Reduction Opportunity Act and the Sustainable Skies Act to establish a new grant program and tax credit to support the production and adoption of sustainable aviation fuel and other low-emission aviation technology. I think this is important to reduce harmful air pollution and to move our aviation industry toward a more environmentally friendly future. I'm glad that critical provisions from both of my bills were included in the Inflation Reduction Act, and while this is an important step, the widespread adoption of sustainable aviation fuels, there's still much more to be done. If confirmed, how will you work to reduce the emissions of the aviation sector in line with the President's goal of net zero emissions by 2050?
Well, let me just say, Senator, that SAF could be a huge game changer. We are on the front lines at Denver International Airport, and other airports are doing some really good things too. I point to San Francisco. The CEO out there is doing great things around SAF. I would want to ramp up to administer the grants that are out there, consistent with the Inflation Reduction Act. I noticed the National Defense Authorization Act, which includes SAF pilot programs, is out there as well, coupled and partnered with DoD agencies. And I know that some airports, including Seattle, is moving towards that. We are too. We'll see who gets there first in terms of the pilot program that's approved by DoD.
Thank you so much. I look forward to working with the FAA administrator to promote and expand sustainable aviation fuels. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much. I think we've heard from just about everybody we're going to hear from. Senator Cruz has a follow-up question, and then I may, depending on time, because we have to get to a vote, submit one or ask myself. So we'll just, and then we'll wrap it up. Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Washington, first round of questioning, we had a lot of discussions about your lack of experience with aviation safety, but there's another concern that is front and center for this committee, because you're the first nominee I can recall who is currently entangled in an ongoing public corruption investigation right now, while your nomination is pending. This investigation involves an alleged pay-to-play contracting scheme that resulted in LA Metro giving $800,000 in no-bid contracts to a politically connected charity called Peace Over Violence, or POV, to run a sexual harassment hotline that was hardly ever used. A whistleblower has alleged, among other things, that when you were the LA Metro CEO, you pushed forward these questionable contracts in order to stay in the good graces of a powerful politician on the LA Metro board. Last December, you told the New York Times, quote, "When I pursued the job in Denver for the airport, much thanks to the credit of the Denver City Council, they looked into all of this and debunked it all, so I would ask Congress to do the same." Mr. Washington, do you still want Congress to look into these allegations?
I have nothing to hide, Senator.
Okay, good. Well, we are looking into them. Even though you say that the Denver City Council debunked it all, the LA Sheriff's Office determined that these allegations had merit. In fact, last September, the Sheriff's Office executed a criminal search warrant at LA Metro's headquarters based on these allegations. And you were named in that search warrant, not once, not twice, but numerous times. The search warrant authorizes the Sheriff's Office to seize emails and other communications between you and other individuals involved in the investigation. But that's not all. The search warrant also includes specific allegations that you personally engaged in misconduct. For example, here on page 24 of the search warrant, the warrant says that a witness stated that, quote, "Although there was no legitimate reason for Metro to outsource such a service to POV in a sole source contract, the contract was pushed forward by CEO Philip Washington in order to remain in good graces with Supervisor Sheila Kuhl." As a reminder, POV is a charity that received $800,000 in a no-bid contract to run a hotline for LA Metro that was hardly ever used. And Sheila Kuhl is a powerful politician on LA Metro's board who was longtime friends with the head of POV. The California Attorney General's office is now leading the investigation into this public corruption scheme. Mr. Washington, have you spoken with the California Attorney General's office about the status of their investigation?
No, I have not, Senator.
Well, the Republican committee staff did last week. We reached out to the California Attorney General's office to inquire on the status of the investigation, and the Attorney General's office said that there is an ongoing criminal investigation into this matter, and the staff said in particular that you have a, quote, "material involvement in the case," and that the investigation is months away from being completed. That's all bad enough, but even more amazingly, the staff at the Attorney General's office told us that at that time, they were not aware of anybody from the White House, from the FBI, or from the Senate who had contacted them about their ongoing public corruption investigation where you have material involvement. Now, that is remarkable. I understand the chairwoman has subsequently spoken with the California Attorney General's office, but at the time, nobody had talked to them, according to the AG's office. That is remarkable, and it is more than a little troubling. I think it's fair to say California sheriffs, the LA sheriff, and the California Attorney General are not Republicans. They're not right-wing activists with an axe to grind. And the fact that this corruption case is ongoing, it's truly remarkable that this committee is considering confirming a nominee in the middle of an ongoing investigation for public corruption. And I am hard-pressed to think of anything more damaging to the FAA than not only confirming someone who is not qualified and has no experience in aviation safety, but secondly, doing so while a public corruption case is ongoing, which, according to the terms of the search warrant, implicates you directly. And if it so happened that you ended up indicted as a result of this ongoing investigation, I don't know if that will happen or not, the investigation needs to conclude. What sort of damage would it do to the FAA to have the administrator indicted on public corruption?
Well, a couple of things, Senator.
Yeah, and please respond to...
Oh, okay, thank you. That particular contract was initiated before I arrived at Metro. There has been no findings of wrongdoing by me. I stand by the work that was done in this contract to...
Are you saying the search warrant is wrong? When it says, these are the allegations of the search warrant that Philip Washington pushed it forward.
That is wrong. That is false. I never talked with anyone about that contract. This was done with a delegation of authority to my department heads, but the allegations are false. And I talked to no one. You mentioned former Supervisor Sheila Kuehl. I never talked to her about the contract.
Okay, but the AG investigation is not concluded, is that correct?
No one has talked to me from the AG office. No one has called me from the sheriff office. No one has contacted me about this case at all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Washington, one of the things that keeps coming up in this discussion has been this Southwest Airlines outage and the fact that literally thousands of people were stranded over several days without any idea of what was going to happen next. For me, one of my constituents that seemed to be most prominent was a high school basketball coach and his wife and the kids, and they were down in Vegas at a tournament, and they literally for 4 days, right around Christmas, had to figure out what to do next. And so every day was a challenge. They felt like they had it pretty good because they actually went and had a place and had all the kids there, and they celebrated Christmas together, so it turned out to be a bonding experience for them. But several times they went back to the airport to find many other people just sleeping on the floor of the airport, trying to figure out what was going to happen next. So in the hearing that we had on the NOTAM issue, one of the things that the Southwest pilots brought up is they thought that Southwest had lost operational control. That meant that the operation of what was the airline's flights, where the pilots were, where the pilots needed to be, they basically did not know. And one of the things that the FAA administrator, if confirmed, can take action against enforcement of the fact that they did not have, they had loss of control. So what I'm interested in knowing, I think everybody in this hearing is you're getting a drift here that nobody wants an industry person who's too cozy with industry. People want a new day at the FAA, and they want the FAA to make sure they're thinking about consumers and, as you mentioned several times, safety. So if confirmed, would you make sure that you took aggressive action on making sure that either fines or their certificates, things of that nature, were looked at In this case, what we're trying to do is get Southwest to own up to the fact that they need to fix this system so that it doesn't happen again. So would you be aggressive on this issue?
Yes, I would, Senator.
Okay, thank you. That concludes our hearing today. Senators will have till close of business March 6th to submit questions for the record. The witnesses will have to the close of business March 13th to respond, and that concludes our hearing.